Okay, I advise members that the committee meeting is now in public session and will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. We'll start by taking apologies. I've received none, just that Mr. Buckley will be slightly late. Declarations of interest, members. Are there any declarations?
Just declare the Federation of Small Business members, Federation of Small Business, who are given his own.
You're a member, or your business?
Well, the business is a member.
Yeah, your business is a member. Yeah, no problem at all. Okay, chairperson's business members, item number 3, an informal meeting with ADS members. As previously agreed by the committee, I met with representatives of the aerospace, defence, security and space industries yesterday here in Parliament buildings. A note of the meeting has been issued to members. The industry is worth present over £2 billion to the Northern Ireland economy. Their main concern was that as is such an important economic sector, they hadn't been contacted by the department when the sectoral plans were being developed. And they were slightly disappointed that their industry, given that it had increased 100% in the past 10 years, had not been worthy in the department's view of inclusion. Are members content that we would contact the department asking that they link in with ADS, given the important role that they play in the department?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you. They had also, at some stage in the future, members, if we wish to visit any of the aerospace businesses across Northern Ireland, they have a really good document that shows the work that they're doing in each member's constituency. So in the future, if members are content, we might try and schedule a visit. Are members content with that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Item 4 then is draft minutes. Members, at page 7 of our packs are the reflections of our deliberations last week. Are members content that I sign those as a true and accurate reflection? Thank you. Matters arising, members, are there any items coming from the minutes that members wish to raise at this stage that aren't included at a later agenda item? No. Okay, we then move to item number 6, impact of the Chancellor's budget statement, Federation of Small Business, Hospitality, Ulster and Retail, Northern Ireland. The committee will now receive oral evidence from representatives of the aforementioned organisations regarding the adverse impact of the Chancellor's recent budget. Could I refer members to page 25 to 45, which is a briefing paper provided by the FSB, Hospitality, Ulster and Retail NI, and pay particular attention, members, to page 47 of our pack. Raise have produced a very useful document in relation to the impact on the Northern Ireland economy of the recent budget. Okay, the gentleman in front will be known by many of us and hopefully all of us. Roger Pollan, who is from the Federation of Small Business, Colin Neal, Head of Hospitality Ulster, and Glenn Roberts, Head of Retail NI. At this stage, I'm going to ask Roger if you're content, if you want to make an opening statement, then we'll do some questions and then allow each guest to then give theirs and ask some questions. So Roger, I'll hand over to you first, sir.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. So my name is Roger Pollan, Head of the Federation of Small Businesses in Northern Ireland. So just set some of the context and then I think that will give it more meaning. So FSB is the UK's largest business representative organisation, including about 6,000 members here in Northern Ireland. And these members come from all sections of the economy, ranging from sole traders to businesses with hundreds of employees. And we've spoken to a great many of them since the budget, just to understand what their impressions of it are, how it's going to impact on them. And so I'm going to try and share those impressions with the committee here today. So in January, the Labour Party, in their role as official opposition, published a report entitled A New Partnership, in which they recognised that business and government need to work together. And they specifically said business hates uncertainty. And they proclaimed that the Shadow Secretary of State at the time for Business and Trade, Jonathan Reynolds, and the Shadow Chancellor at the time, Rachel Reeves, have prioritised clarity, certainty, transparency and stability in Labour's relations with business. So with that as the framework, and repeatedly hearing an ambition that the party was aspiring to growth and saw growth as the essential criterion to address many challenges, the business world seemed quite reassured by what they thought was coming down the track. Then the election came in and the Labour Party swept to power. But shortly afterwards, rumours started to swirl. There was a rumour about a £22 billion black hole in the budget, possibilities of tax changes of many sorts and changes to pensions. The new government, I suppose, showed that it was prepared to weather storms. So they did that particularly with the withdrawal of the winter fuel payments. That was a major statement to come out with so early in their tenure. But that clarity and transparency and certainty and stability that we'd heard about started to dissipate, and businesses really just started to take actions to prevent what they saw as possible tax raids coming in the autumn with the budget. And a lot of our members fed back that they started to undertake asset sales, ownership restructuring and other initiatives at an increasing rate simply on the basis of rumour. So the certainty that they sought was dissipating very quickly. So at FSB, we chose our ground very carefully, and sought to secure commitments to protect smaller employers and the sectors that are still suffering huge post-COVID pressures: retail, hospitality, tourism, leisure. And when it eventually came, the budget was delivered in difficult circumstances. So it wasn't a surprise that it set out a range of major tax increases. But to be fair, the full extent and combined with the increases to the national living wage was way beyond the worst expectations of most business owners. The vast majority of new taxes will fall on businesses. Others will hit entrepreneurs more personally, and families will bear a major brunt of the burden. But other costs are also being levied in parallel, which will impact almost everyone. It was also a budget that was extremely short on mitigations or business growth incentives, but those areas that FSB had focused on, I have to say, I was pleased at least that the National Insurance Contributions allowance was doubled, and the rates relief for retail, hospitality, leisure and tourism was maintained in England, albeit at a lower rate than the discount before. So that, I suppose, was the context. Businesses had heard pre-election rhetoric about not raising VAT, income tax or national insurance. So it was a bit of a shock to see the employer's national insurance moved up to 15%, and also the threshold at which it was applied being reduced so significantly. And we're hearing a lot of information coming back from members about the impact that's going to have locally. Aside from these measures, there were also changes to the tax relief that have been developed specifically to incentivise entrepreneurs and encourage them to reinvest money in their businesses. Now, FSB lobbied on this in advance of the budget, so we were pleased to see the £1 million business asset disposal relief threshold maintained, but nonetheless the tax is almost doubling from 10% up to 18%, and in some cases even higher than that. And that matters because building a business involves taking risk for potential reward in the future. And for the economy to grow, we need more people to be incentivised to take that risk and to turn it in turn into jobs and create opportunities and prosperity for all communities across the country. So that change to business asset relief is not inspiring that, nor will the other changes that have come about to agricultural property relief. There were some welcome proposals for using some of the tax take to invest in infrastructure, which should create economic activity, and if it is built, its legacy could be beneficial. But the massive sums being taken out of business entrepreneurship being disincentivised, and the pressures being compounded by a raft of new employment legislation and reforms that have been proposed is a very real risk that many businesses will crumple under the burden that's being imposed on them. So the true test of this budget is whether, in the face of these massive new taxes, businesses can generate the much vaunted elusive growth that's needed if economic stagnation is to be ended. And it will be immensely challenging, both to Westminster and to government here at Stormont, to strain every sinew to find ways to support businesses and to remove barriers to growth as they redefine the political and business landscape. That's, I suppose, really what we're getting back from our members at the moment, is their sense of what's been done to them.
Perfect. Roger, and thank you for that. And if you're content, I just want to try and cover sort of three broad themes with you. Firstly, the immediate impact of the Chancellor's changes. Secondly, then, what discussions you have had with the Department for the Economy in terms of what levers they're pulling, or what bids they made under October monitoring round or the new budget to try and alleviate some of those. And then finally, any maybe future concerns of future legislation or future actions that the Department for the Economy are proposing that may exacerbate or make even more difficult the current circumstances that you're currently facing. So firstly, just in relation to the current context, and I know members of the committee will be well aware of this, but for those listening at home, I think it's just important that we start with the importance of the small business community here in Northern Ireland. Recent figures show that 90% of businesses across Northern Ireland have 10 or less employees, so they're micro businesses. 4 in 10 of those businesses have a turnover of less than £100,000. So any changes to their current income streams or further taxation will hit a huge amount of people right across the country. In terms of the national insurance changes, have the FSB done any work in terms of what that, in terms of pounds and pence, will mean for additional costs to businesses here in Northern Ireland?
We've started doing some quantification of it, and initially went out to the care sector members, because we thought that's the one that's going to have probably the greatest impact and the greatest challenges in mitigating that impact. So what we saw was that within the children's daycare sector, that typically the increase in employers' national insurance alone will meet an extra burden of an average of £18,600 on nursery settings, and that's not taking into account the increase in the national living wage. That's just on the national insurance. So you're almost talking about one full-time employee additional overhead being loaded onto that sector. Now, obviously, they have very few ways of mitigating that, because they're a very heavily regulated sector. The number of staff they have to have per customer, if you want to call it that, is defined and set out. So they can't make savings in the way that other industries might, by improving productivity and reducing headcount and so on. So they have very, very little option other than to pass it on to their customers, which is another hard-pressed sector of society. The Assembly and Executive has recognised needs assistance to try and retain them in the workforce. So those are the sort of first hard numbers. One other nursery business we spoke with had calculated across their various units that it's going to be an increase of around £300,000 in national insurance alone, just due to the rate and also to the reduction in the threshold. So that is capturing an awful lot more people in the need to pay national insurance. So those, I suppose, are the two initial big ones that we're seeing. Those are the costs that are being calculated by the sectors.
Which is, clearly a devastating impact. So it brings me on then to, we had the Chancellor's statement then in October monitoring round. So given, the importance of the FSB to the Northern Ireland economy and who you represent, did the department engage with you in advance of the October monitoring round? My colleague, Sinead McLaughlin, through the written questions, not to steal your thunder, had already, shown that the department made no bids in this October monitoring round to support business from available funds. We still haven't seen the budget for next year. The Minister is coming. I know it's something that all members will be keen to press. Was there any discussion in relation to the October monitoring round, but also then any discussions in relation to this budget setting process?
Not specifically, no. I think, they're the overarching things of investment and skills, and a response to the generic stuff, but there is a sense that a lot of the economic activities being sort of devolved down to Invest NI, which does a very good job in certain sectors, but there is a sort of ring fence around getting into that assistance and support that they deliver. So for those who manage to get inside the magic circle, there's great support and great effort, and they do very well. But I think the challenge is to make sure that as many businesses as possible can access that support. In terms of skills, generally, yes, that's a sort of recurring theme that we welcome any input and investment there. But I think there's more concern of the burdens that the department is building up that may be coming down the track for us, rather than the inputs they're making to reduce burdens and really make doing business here more dynamic. And I think this budget has put a very sharp focus on it, because a lot of cost has been layered onto us by central government. The executive should be straining every sinew to see what can it do to reduce costs, reduce burdens, deregulate, find ways to mitigate and compensate for what's been done centrally. And that way really play a part in growing the dynamic economy that they aspire to in the programme for government.
And one of the big pieces of legislation that we as a committee will be dealing with is what the Minister has described as a good jobs bill. We haven't seen the detail of that, though. I and others will have read statements from the First Minister telling us what Sinn Féin will legislate for, despite the committee not actually seeing the legislation. But I just wanted to see, had you had any views on that early engagement or the early proposals that are being touted in relation to the good jobs bill?
We've had a lot of engagement on it, yes. I think that the title of it actually in some ways should be troubling. It's a good jobs bill. We've also got to look at good businesses and good business and climate. And I think that the sense we've got there is that there are some very necessary catching up to being done, because the executive, having been down a couple of times over the last few years, there are various things that went through in employment law in GB that haven't been replicated here, and I think it would be beneficial if those were brought into line. So there's some good stuff in there, but I think there's something like 17 areas of employment law being addressed in one bill. And I think there's a real concern that business is utterly unaware of this coming at them. and that there are things buried in there that will be immensely damaging and troubling to businesses, whilst there are some things that will be good and beneficial and important. I think it will be really important for this committee to get right into the detail of that and to understand from businesses why they're so the ones that have heard about it, why they're so deeply concerned about certain aspects of it.
I think you highlight perfectly when we get the legislation why we as a committee will need to take our time at the committee stage of that. That's really useful. Thank you, sir. Kate.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. It's really good to see you. And unsurprisingly, I'm going to ask you a bit more about childcare. I think the work that FSB has done on this in particular to raise awareness of childcare as economic infrastructure is really important. And you've had a big role in getting the change that has happened across the executive. Can you talk a little bit more about, so you said that you rightly said that it's going to have to be passed on to the parents and the fees will increase. And I'm also conscious of how that impacts small business not being able to employ more people. When you're looking at what we need to do as an assembly to reduce the burdens and the barriers, what sort of things are you thinking that we should be looking at?
Well, I suppose that if you take the children's daycare sector specifically, it's regulated by both the Department of Health and the Department of Education, depending whether you're a public provider or a private provider. And you sort of think in somewhere with fewer than 2 million people, to have two separate regulators of the one service that we all rely on seems like duplication and waste. You've then got to look at how there's a lighter touch in the Department of Education. I think they, and I don't speak as an informed expert on childcare, but my sense is that they treat it as about child development, whereas the private sector, which is regulated by health, treats it as child protection. So there's a very different balance of regulation and the burdens in there. And you sort of think that's something that if we could get the industry involved in the way they were during COVID, there was an industry reference group, and I think that was a very valuable way of bringing the people to actually know what they're talking about, to say, okay, how could we do this better to make it continue to work under these extraordinary circumstances? I think the engagement of the sector to say, how can we lift the regulatory burden? How can we actually reduce the costs by doing the process better? Then they'll be better able to deal with the things that have been enforced on them, such as the national insurance increase and the living wage increase, and maybe not have to pass on the full cost of that to their customers, because they can make savings by cutting out some of the bureaucracy and some of the process that's currently demanded of them.
Really interesting and useful. Can I, and something I think would be good for the committee to look at in a bit more detail, can I ask separately then around, the Minister obviously is focusing on kind of sub-regional growth, sub-regional growth, and just the impact that the budget is going to have on this, but wider issues around non-domestic rates and other decisions that can impact kind of small businesses. Can you talk a bit more about that?
I suppose there's a sense that it's not really connected enough yet here, although we've got an executive. The rating policy is Department of Finance, business growth is Department for the Economy, the mechanism of connecting all that is Department for Infrastructure, and there's a sense that we need to make sure that there's a bigger vision and a focus on delivery, rather than just talking about creating this nice benign climate, because it seems to me that the business generally is created where somebody perceives an opportunity, and they either come up with a new innovation or they come up with a service that's in demand there, and for us to try and over-engineer that is risky. It's individuals who take that risk to set up a business, and they will do it wherever works for them, wherever they see demand or wherever they live. So we've got to try and be not too over prescriptive, but make sure that we take away all those barriers and burdens. At the moment, one of the biggest barriers is the ability to build new premises. Yeah. That is a huge impediment. That probably should be the number one thing in the programme for government, is actually how do we facilitate the private sector getting on and delivering the houses, the offices, the factories and everything else that we need if we really want to grow an economy. And at the moment that is stuck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Sinead?
Oh, thank you, and good to see you before the committee. In your papers, you've indicated for the hospitality sector, the low profit margins, the high labour intensity, and the inability to kind of raise prices as key defining factors that need, I suppose, bespoke packages in relation to taxation. In May, the Assembly voted through a motion asking the Department of Finance and the Department for Economy to come together to look at the difficulties that the industries were facing. It was passed, as I say, in the Assembly. Have you seen any evidence of the two departments coming together in order to look intensely at those issues and perhaps coming up with packages that would support your industry?
I suppose the honest answer is not yet. And there's been some discussions. There's been, there are certain things happening in the fringes, but everybody sits back and rues the demise of the high street and wonder why it's happening. And yet we had a 75% rates discount applied 3 years ago, and again 2 years ago, and again 1 year ago in England, because they recognised the pressure there. And even in the most recent budget, they've agreed it to be a 40% discount. We sit back and keep the rates at the full level, and then wonder why the high street is facing so many challenges. So if it's happening, let's make it happen fast. I think that's one of the criticism business has is the speed of things. One very good, it'd be well known to this committee, but I'll not name him at the moment, but a really one of Northern Ireland's most successful entrepreneurs described it once. He said, opportunity will move along and you've got to grab it when it's in front of you. If you wait until all of the processes of the civil service, that opportunity's gone. So it's just not there to be taken.
And a recent, another debate recently that we had was about the movement or the reactivation of the High Street Task Force, just exactly what we're talking about there now, moving it from the Executive Office, where it previously sat, into the Department for Economy, where it would probably have more synergy. For support of the small business. Again, that was passed through the Assembly. In any of your discussions with the department, does that appear to be a movement that is now taking place, that High Street Task Force with the collective of the industry?
No, there's no sense of dynamism. If I could take a parallel to that, if you look back in 13 months ago, we had some catastrophic flooding in Newry and Morning Down area, and money was made available from the Secretary of State to the Civil Service in Northern Ireland, who then gave it to the Department for the Economy, who then gave it to Newry Morning Down Council. And the upshot of it is there are businesses still on the phone to me literally every week saying, we haven't had it, we've had half the money that's been promised, we can't get it, we're being told we have to apply as if it's a grant. So there is a pot of cash that was made available for emergency response, and 13 months on, businesses are going into their second Christmas since the flooding without having had the proper restitution that everybody agreed was needed. So whilst I appreciate the suggestion that moving it from one department to another may centralise it into somebody that can really grasp it and do something about it, I would be wrong if I didn't tell you that when I went in post-COVID into the library in our office to do a bit of a clear out in the light of the new way of working, I found the High Streets Task Force report of 2012.
Yeah.
And you just look and think, well, the high street is still going, is still declining, and still we have a few levers that we've refused resolutely to pull to assist it.
Yeah, it's frustrating, I suppose, for us as legislators and members of the Assembly that a lot of motions go to the floor, they're passed, and they die, and we are actively trying to support the small business economy in Northern Ireland. The other
on that, we really appreciate the support, and I really appreciate the efforts that everybody makes within the parameters they have. But it's the sense of nobody then owning the responsibility to deliver on what's been agreed and decided. That's where I think we need to maybe bring a sharper focus, is holding some people's feet to the fire.
Can I just ask Colin? Colin, you've made a number of requests in your paper in relation to.
I'll go back to each. Allow them to do their opening statement.
All right.
We'll
Okay.
ask them
That's
if
all
you're
right.
happy
Then
enough.
okay.
David.
Thank you, Roger, and thanks for coming in. I want to look at growth and how we see growth. You talked about sort of barriers to growth. Can you talk us through those barriers, or what you see as those barriers?
I suppose if we take it back to the Assembly and the Executive and so on, we saw the programme for government and it set out this aspiration for Northern Ireland to become a globally competitive and sustainable economy. But it was silent, utterly silent on two key things. It was silent on the Windsor Framework and it was silent on corporation tax. So sort of think, we've got some fantastic businesses here in Northern Ireland and some of the greatest innovators in the world, producing world-leading devices and systems and processes and inventions. We have been offered the possibility of one key lever there, which is corporation tax, and we have the fact of the Windsor framework, meaning we have a different settlement. We need the executive, we need the assembly to be ambitious for what that might look like. There's a meaningful vote coming up next week. Really interesting to see, what engagement have all the members who are going to make that vote? What have they done with businesses to see, is it working well, or should we send some sort of signal when we vote in those lobbies? We probably know what way that vote's going to go. It's not about calling for something to be unstable, but it's about saying how well informed is everybody who's going to make a decision on that. And if they feel that businesses are really struggling under the current system, what are we going to do to try and improve that system, not necessarily scrap that system? So I think those are two big levers that we'd like to see the executive working with to make this place really actually a fantastically competitive, dynamic economy that it could be. Access to two markets, a low rate of corporation tax. We see what it's doing south of the border in terms of tax returns. If we want to get growth here, surely we should be empowering our businesses, and that would be a great way of counterbalancing some of the cost that's been laden on through the budget recently.
Okay, so can I take those separately? If just not the use of the Windsor framework. So on one hand, you're trying to explain to me what's the difficulty for business. Maybe it's the best.
What's the
difficulty you're saying for business? If you're saying business is having difficulties with it, but yet you still want dual market access, and so what is the difficulty, and what can we do as a?
I think one of the difficulties is the fact that the rule book is not yet finalised. So we have things like the veterinary medicines agreement has been deferred until the end of next year. So we've got uncertainty around how it will look beyond that. We've got changes around the general product safety regulations which come in next week, which means that businesses in Northern Ireland have to be selling goods that meet the EU GPSR, whereas businesses in GB meet a UK one, and we are the interface between that. And using platforms that provide for the whole of the UK means you've got a lot of difficulties around there. These are just difficulties. They just need somebody to sit down and work their way through them. But at the moment, nobody has yet done that. Guidance is very late in the day coming out, so businesses don't quite know the ground on which they're standing and how to plan for the future. So go back to the point at the very top, business hates uncertainty. We've got a lot of uncertainty there. So we just need to navigate that and actually try and capture the best of it.
Is that the Department of Economy? Is that whose role is that to bring that certainty around the GPSR? I've had loads of calls. I've dealt with a lot of businesses, and we spoke to the Federation about it. So I've raised it with the minister. I've done so. But what can we who fixes that? Is that the Department of Economy? Does that sit with this committee, or is that?
I think there's two things to it. One is that if every minister and the executive has an ambition for Northern Ireland to do well, then the attitude behind that will be, well, what do we need to do to assist that? I think in terms of this, if there were a collective executive position on how the executive would like to see certain aspects of it operating, that would be much stronger than any lobby organisation or any individual department or minister trying to push the way. But then it comes down to a negotiation between Westminster and Brussels, or not necessarily a negotiation, but a discussion about the issues that need to be resolved. So I think having a fairly united executive saying, well, this is what we want, will carry a lot more weight than having any individual minister saying, I need that, because it's not in their gift. They're only influencing a process.
Okay, and the second part of that, just quickly, you touched on corporation tax. So one of the things, the national insurance and the rest of the raise on our cost of business, we have absolutely no control over here. So what difference would that make? Or is there a potential difference that would make here?
I think it would make a huge difference for two reasons. One, it would reduce the burden on indigenous businesses and the taxes that they have to pay. They don't necessarily mind what the mix of those taxes is, as long as the bottom line is within a manageable area. At the moment, it's gone up significantly because of what's happened at the budget. There's an ability for the executive to help manage that and reduce it, but also then as a sort of a lightning rod for attracting inward investment from around the world. If we, on this same island, have at the moment a rate of tax where north of the border is double the rate south of the border, it's very hard for us to be really seriously competitive in that light. So you sort of say, if we take ownership of that, reduce our tax rate, and then maximise all of our other things, such as our skills, our educational standards, the cost of doing business here compared to doing it in Dublin, then I think we've got a very compelling offering. But I think everybody needs to put their shoulder to the wheel to achieve that.
Thank you, David. Philip?
Thank you, Chair. David kind of literally covered some of the stuff that I was going to ask, but just in terms, because we all recognise the invaluable role small and medium enterprises have to our economy, and we all recognise the very difficult financial situation that many of them are already in, even prior to the budget. But see, in terms of the national insurance contributions, can I ask if there's a particular sector or even a particular workforce size that is likely to be hit harder than others, or is it just right across the board?
There are two. It's not right across the board. No, there are two things in it, and it was quite complicated. So that the rate went up to 15%, the threshold came down, and the allowance went up. So when you sit within all of that, what it means is that for those businesses who have around 4 to 6 employees, the doubling of the allowance effectively means that they come out of it slightly better off. But the reduction in the threshold means that a lot of businesses that had part-time employees for whom they didn't need to pay national insurance are now having to pay it, so they're getting caught in that net. And for any employee for whom national insurance is having to be paid, it's gone up to 15%. So there's 3 bits of the jigsaw, and as the chairman said at the start, there's a lot of businesses here sit in the less than 10 employee category. So there are a lot of businesses here that benefited from FSB's win in the budget, if you like, the doubling of the allowance. That's good and that's welcome, but they're only a slice of the entire economy here. And also, if you think about the ambition to grow a business, we've now got a number of measures have come in this budget that actually press down on anybody's ambition to grow. Because once you get up above a certain threshold there, you start to incur more national insurance. Once you get above a certain threshold, your business is in a category where you won't necessarily get the tax relief you did before as an entrepreneur. So there's a number of things that just make it much less attractive to grow a business. And that's a really bad place for any economy to be.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. And in terms of, because a lot of the stuff, not all the stuff, but a lot of what we're talking about today is coming from Westminster. Obviously, the executive have a role in terms of trying to mitigate some of this. But can I just ask, with regard to engagement, like what engagement have the FSB done themselves with the Labour government or your counterparts in Britain in terms of engagement, and is there any progress being made there?
Yes, so our chair of policy and advocacy UK-wide is Tina McKenzie, who is from here, and that's a very, very useful advantage, and she meets with the Chancellor and the Business Secretary about once a month. And had good conversations in the run-up to this budget, and was able to make the point of what were the key things that really mattered for small businesses. So the doubling of the allowance was a key ambition for FSB to achieve, and certain other things around business asset disposal relief, protecting the £1 million threshold there. So the case was certainly made. She also was making the case about the retail, hospitality, leisure and tourism rates relief, but that was obviously only going to be for England, coming from the budget. So yes, we're engaged in there. Yes, we keep on making the case. But the Chancellor came in and they set out a £22 billion black hole. I know there's been a bit of debate about the accuracy of that, but let's accept that we're there. The budget then went ahead to raise vastly more than that. So the government is intent on doing other things for which it needs money, and it has come to business to put that money in the kitty. And that's going to be quite a major pressure pressing down on businesses right across the UK, not just in England.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
You, Gary?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Roger, for your presentation. Obviously, there were a lot of people disappointed by the Labour budget. Obviously, businesses, farmers, pensioners, people who genuinely have had their livelihoods threatened by some of the measures that have been brought forward. I also take the Chair's point in relation to bids that need to be made by the Department for the Economy in terms of packages of support to try and mitigate some of the most dangerous elements of the budget. And of course that needs to come from the other ministers as well. And there's financial issues that need to be addressed, but there's also practical steps that I believe could be taken to at a low cost to try and address some of the challenges that you've had. One of them you mentioned is even around the issue of planning, for example. I know of we've literally lost millions of pounds of investment in my constituency because of slow planning processes, lack of decisions, and people who are actually small businesses who even want to refurbish their premises to grow their businesses are being let down in terms of lengthy delays. So I suppose my question to you is, we need to press for financial packages, but are there other measures that you believe that could be taken relatively quickly at a low cost that we as a committee could be pushing to try and get changes to even try and provide some assistance in the short term?
Yes. Thanks for the question. So the first one, I think, is starting. It sits within the Department for the Economy, and it's to apply a thing called the SAMBIT, and that's an acronym that stands for a Small and Micro Business Impact Test. And it's really important for this economy, which relies on those businesses in that sector, to conduct that sort of test before any action is proposed or taken. And we're starting to see it being embedded. It's a bit patchy as yet, but at least it's a process where you actually understand what is the impact on small and micro businesses before you go ahead with some measure. The next one, and we're glad to see there is some in fact, quite significant effort being put into this, is prompt payment. Paying your bills on time. The public sector here had, the last figures I looked at, had 1.75 million invoices presented to it, and it managed to pay 250,000 of them beyond the 30-day time. That's just unacceptable, because it doesn't save the public sector money, unlike a business which might find a way of using that to manage its cash flow and save some banking costs or whatever. In the public sector, the money has been earmarked because they wouldn't have commissioned the works or the goods without having the money up in advance. So that paying the bills promptly is a huge benefit at virtually no cost. And then beyond that, I think the planning one you talk about is very interesting, but it's the supply chain impact of that. So where you're saying about that stopped a business going ahead and building its premises, it also stopped a builder winning the contract to do that, which stopped the subcontractors earning their living, which meant there was less money going around in the local economy. So that one decision failing to be taken has a huge tail, and we have loads of those decisions across the country, which means there's just an awful lot of stuff not happening that ought to be happening. And I suppose there's a couple of other finer points. So the deregulation points that we made about is where we can actually reduce cost on businesses just simply by taking some of the burdensome regulation out of the way. But also, we're just a bit troubled by the we need to make Northern Ireland a place that wants more people to start a business and run a business. And we're concerned about the lack of funding to young enterprise, because it's it's the initial ground floor basis of education of school age people into enterprise, into knowing how to use money and so on. So as a longer term project, I think that was something that we should all have an aspiration to put back in place. Those are some of the things I think that we can quite quickly move on without huge cost.
Well, thanks for that, Roger, and actually very useful. And as you say, those are, I think, in terms of the SAMBIT piece and the prompt payments, certainly as a committee, I think it is important that we ask those questions, and we will certainly do that, and work with our colleagues on the Finance Committee as well, no doubt around those other issues. I suppose a final question is just around the piece that you've said or was mentioned just in relation to that High Street Task Force. I think it is unfortunate. The High Street Task Force, obviously haven't been on it, I suppose I have to declare a bit of an interest, but I felt that it was a good piece of work in terms of collaboration and bringing the various sectors together. It is disappointing that we haven't seen a momentum there, but I suppose, do you still see a value in progressing with that piece of work, and just to hear your thoughts on that?
Short answer is yes, but it is a matter, it's the next point is the progressing with it. I think it needs energy, it needs dynamism, it needs momentum, and I think there's a lot of good work done in it, so I think a lot of the ingredients have been identified and put together, but they're just not being cooked yet.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Gary. Diana?
Thank you very much, and good morning to all the panel. It's good to see you there. A lot of faces I do recognise. I know we've covered quite a bit, colleagues have covered quite a bit there that I was considering coming into this meeting. just really, the pressures that the small business sector is facing coming out of obviously COVID in the past and now with the budget implications. And looking at survival rates for small businesses in Northern Ireland, have you any indication yet about, I've been speaking to a lot of small businesses, but about the impact that the effect of this budget will have on survival of small businesses. A second question I wanted to ask was, is there any indication of businesses, particularly I represent a border area from Anna, South Tyrone, that businesses are looking at relocating because of more favourable terms to conduct their businesses in a different, jurisdiction to move to the south? So just be interested to have your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we spoke with a number of different members who are then the conduit to others, so accountancy firms and legal firms in our membership. One of the legal firms was saying that they actually, in advance of the budget, were literally their teams are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to deal with all of the requests and demands for corporate restructuring, business sales, and so on and so on. So that was in advance of the budget, that was the uncertainty and the speculative phase. That is still happening because some of the deadlines for changes are still some way off. So there's still an awful lot of activity happening as people try to mitigate some of the worst effects of it. And I suppose the very fact that it's possible to mitigate those effects then is why people are concerned that the changes were made. If you didn't want the effect to be mitigated, why make the change? So if go back to what is the objective of it, and the concern is that whatever the objective, the outworkings of it is going to be just to have a suppressing effect on local indigenous businesses being started and being grown. That's part of the problem. There's a lid on things now that reduces ambition, and I think that's something we need to focus on.
And just going back to the other question about relocation, are you getting any indications there about businesses looking? Yeah, it is a small business sector, but looking to relocate. Is there any data on that?
There's not data, but yes, there's a lot of anecdotal suggestion that is at least being explored. These are major decisions for people, and we've had a system that's been very stable for 30 years, and suddenly there's a huge amount of upheaval. So people have to work out what are all the unintended consequences of taking those sorts of actions, as well as the intended ones. But you're absolutely right. It's to say it was febrile before the budget. I think it's now just a very active conversation that's going on in lots of quarters.
Thank you, Roger. That's useful. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen. It's good to see you all again. The Labour budget, it's been a budget of deceit for so many people, so many faithful, hard-working businesses that feel that time and time again, they're being taxed to death, and secondly, any time that they put in changes in place to try and make their businesses more effective, more efficient, that they're continually being strangled by government overreach. And I really do pity those small business owners, many of whom I talked to. It was a budget of deceit in the sense that, number one, their main commitment was that of growth. What vague language of growth in a party manifesto? And I don't for one moment think that the only reason that they got away with it was because the Conservatives have been so disastrous in their time. But on growth, we've seen the budget result in a downgrading of growth. Company insolvencies, and this maybe alludes to Diana's question in some regard, company insolvencies right across the UK actually were at record levels post-budget. Have we noticed, I'm sure it's maybe anecdotal at this stage, but is there any evidence to suggest the number of businesses that have now filed for insolvency post-UK Labour budget?
The short answer is it's too early for us to have that data. I think the majority of businesses in Northern Ireland are not incorporated, so the process of seeing that will be less obvious than those that are incorporated. Mm-hmm. But I think we will watch. I'm not going to take the bait to respond on a party political basis. All I would say is that this is FSB's 50th anniversary, and the reason we came into being was because of something the government did to the self-employed 50 years ago, where they hiked the rate of national insurance to what was regarded as just an unsustainable level, and a lot of businesses came together to say, no, that's just unacceptable, and that's where FSB was formed. Within a short while, there were 25,000 businesses a month joining in that pursuit. So I think we've got track record of showing that when a government goes too far, business will respond. I think we may be, at the moment, I think, we have a new government, they've got an agenda, they've got a very strong mandate for within the House of Commons, but I think we need to be in there guiding them as to the impacts of some of the decisions they're taking.
I think this is a moment where they have gone too far, and I would encourage FSB and other representative bodies to bring this to the highest level and make a lot of noise. So FSB represents all small businesses in Northern Ireland, or the opportunity to become members. I'm right in saying that, aren't I?
Yeah, we have about 6,000 members. There are more than that who are still very welcome to join, but what we're doing in policy and lobbying is for the benefit of all small businesses here, with whether they're members or not. And I think that...
Does that include farmers?
It does. Actually includes a lot of farmers and a lot of farm businesses.
What has been there? I know what the response to me has been post-Labour budget. What has been the feedback of those representative farmers, small business owners? Again, it's really struggling in terms of whenever we look at the disproportionate between asset rich and cash flow in terms of generation within a farm business. What has been the feedback to FSB from the farming community regarding the impact of this budget on their viability?
Well, one person put it to me that if every time you changed the chief executive of Sainsbury's, you had to give 20% of the value of Sainsbury's to the government, how long would that business last? And I think they were drawing the analogy with farmers. The land is being treated as part of the value of the business, where in reality, it's the business you operate on that land. I think those two being conflated has made this a very difficult... that actually is what makes the difference between that and any ordinary family business, is because the land is such an integral part to it. And we have, say, a number of farmers in Mids. We have a very common purpose with the voice that's been raised for farmers on this issue. I think it's a very difficult policy to understand what was intended to be achieved, especially when the Chancellor said there are so many ways of mitigating it and so few people would be caught by it, which raised the question, well then why do it, and cause all the uncertainty that has been caused.
And I know your organisation have been involved throughout the entire period of Brexit negotiations in terms of the stakeholder at the table, and you've always been a very faithful organisation to understanding that there is political connotations to all of these arguments, but representing truly the best interest and needs of businesses, and also being a voice for them if there is concern. And there is a lot of concern at present. We see with the GPSR, I'm being lobbied now by business who are really starting to feel the grip of what these new trading arrangements mean for them. We're having it from consumers, small businesses with regards to their supply chain and GB. Do you, obviously as somebody that was involved right throughout, and that was a Conservative government, do you sense any change from Labour? Because certainly I'm not detecting an appetite from Labour to address some of these thorny issues, even with a reset in relations. Be interested to hear your perspective on that particular point.
I think that you're right that the appetite isn't easily discernible. That was why I made a point earlier that I think we need to get, if we could get the whole executive to raise a collective voice on what the UK government needs to do, that would probably be the most powerful way we can try and change things here. I think we've heard Nick Thomas-Symonds saying that he wants to pursue full and faithful implementation of the Windsor Framework as part of the conditions for a reset of relations between the UK and the EU. That's may be laudable, but it's ignoring the fact that the Windsor Framework, as it is currently operating and as it's going to continue to evolve, is causing problems that need to be resolved, such as the veterinary medicine issue.
And my final point, because I know there's much more to be talked about, but the GPSR coming in next week after maybe, 13th I think of December, yeah. There is anecdotal evidence and indeed business evidence to suggest that this disruption in supply chain is really going to affect consumers and other small businesses in the supply chain in Northern Ireland. Do you accept that that is a serious challenge now businesses are going to have to address on the 13th of December? And do you believe that there's been adequate provision to offset against some of these challenges?
So to answer your question specifically, yes, I accept that it's a very serious challenge that businesses will have to embrace. I think that, to the second point, I don't think there's been enough awareness raised in the detail of what they need to do. So there's going to be a scramble for businesses to understand there's a problem that they need to get engaged with, and then they need to work out how they're going to engage with that and overcome it in a way that doesn't affect or negatively affect supply chains and availability of product here. So yes, this goes back to the point about the uncertainty and the fact that the rule book has not yet been made clear. I think GPSR has started to come more detailed guidance just over the last week or so. You know, that's just far too late in the day for something that kicks in on Friday the 13th of December this year. You know, we haven't had the run-in time to understand the implications of that as we might have done. And so I think that all speaks to the point that if the UK are pursuing a better relationship with the EU, we've got to understand, well, what does a better relationship actually then mean for us here? At the moment, I think that there was a lot of talk of trust and trusted traders and everything else. We don't really see the outworkings of what that trust could and should deliver. And I think that's where business is scrambling to try and navigate that at very short notice most of the time.
Thank you, Jonathan. Colin, this is a very busy time of the year for you, so thank you very much for coming along. I'm doing my best at weekends to support you this month, so I'm trying my best, but this is clearly a very, very difficult budget for the hospitality sector, which is of the utmost importance to the Northern Ireland economy, and at a time when the hospitality industry should be focused on delivering at Christmas, which sustains them then for a number of months. Obviously, this is the last thing that your membership needed. So from your perspective, if you just want to give an opening statement at this stage, Colin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to come along this morning. I have supplied a research paper that the level of impact that the budget is having, it's really the straw that's breaking the camel's back, and we've taken it seriously, so hence retained an independent economist to actually look at this for us, so we're not just going down with this sort of thing. But I think it is important that we contextualise this in the straw that broke the camel's back too, because the hospitality industry, I think everybody would agree, was the most impacted by COVID, was the slowest to come out of it, come out really debt-ridden, didn't get a chance to recover again because of the cost of living and the cost of doing business crisis. We were looking at inflation in food, somewhere between 20 to 25% inwards in 2 years. The previous 10 years, that was 9% in total. So the pressures that come on our industry, and we trade in a very price sensitive area, because we're at the end of your disposable income, we're that discretionary bit where you pay all your bills, you maybe buy a new coat, you do whatever you need because winter's coming, and then you have a few pound left to go out and socialise. And then obviously we rely on that tourism element, which has to be competitive, particularly on the island of Ireland. And look, Roger has very eloquently laid out the relief that Westminster realised that hospitality, along with retail and leisure, were in trouble during the cost of living crisis, and stepped in to give significant relief, which manifested as 75% in England. Wales, and we all know the Barnett consequentials was to come across, you can't replicate the same. Wales followed in with 50% using their Barnett consequential because it's lower. And look, we know that money, when it came here, you couldn't have given everybody 75% rate relief because the number of small businesses we have against the Barnett consequential, some would not have allowed that. But the money came, obviously went into the baseline budget, but the reality is that money would not be there if we weren't in trouble. It wouldn't be there. The baseline budget would have been lower. I think it's disingenuous to sort of say, look, we want to take money off health and education and such. That money was taken off us to give to them, and so we've been left in Northern Ireland in a worse position than our English counterparts and our Welsh counterparts, because we've been left weaker because we got none of that help these last few years, and we're seeing it coming again in April at 40% in England. Now Wales will do what they do, and our Barnett Council will come here, and yes, that's is reduced, as we all know, and it's not ring fenced, but I think it is important that it's contextualised. If it's given to health and education, it's being taken off struggling businesses to do that, not the other way around with it. The UK budget then obviously at it, and I suppose what galls me is the autumn statement was called "Fixing the Foundations to Deliver Change," and what the measure really did was further damage our province, because we are, there's no account of regional differences here. That budget was an English budget, if you like. If you look at when they've done some of this stuff, I am sure they took into account, well, hospitality, retail and leisure are getting 75% relief, so that'll mitigate some of this, but we're not. So we're left with that double whammy that we just have got less and less room to move. Obviously, the national insurance contributions, nobody's seen that level coming. And look, when it came to the increase in the national living wage, everybody wants to pay people more, but it has consequences. That money has to come from somewhere. And again, it was a quite substantial increase. It wasn't inflation-led. And it doesn't just affect people on the national living wage, because all your differentials goes up. If you have a supervisor who's on £1 an hour more than that today, they want to be £1 an hour more than that come April. So right up the actual employment chain, it goes right through. And look, the changes too in the national insurance, employers' national insurance, hits hospitality significantly, because we have a lot of part-time employees that now have come into that threshold. We have a lot of young employees. So obviously the substantial increase in that living wage and the fact they're dropping into more national insurance from us, we're particularly hit in that sector. We've quite a young workforce. We've modelled, and you'll see in the evidence supplied, 3 different scenarios, but if I pick up the easy one, the living wage and the employer's national insurance will add 2,500 cost to every employee. So every employee you have right across, and say we've modelled that at different hours. That's a 38-hour worker on the national living wage. We can't pass on the cost. We're at a price ceiling. We're labour intensive, so really big. We can't automate. We can't turn around and go, okay, well, we could if you want a vending machine, and I don't think that's where we want to go. And indeed, an alcohol vending machine in Northern Ireland is illegal, so we can't even go there. But it is, we're now in that position where we've nowhere to go, and we can't pass it on. We look enviously at our counterparts in the Republic of Ireland, who actually have a government that believe in hospitality and tourism and invest in it. We're actually dearer now to employ people than in the Republic of Ireland. Our VAT rate, and I banged that drum for years. And we compete with the Republic of Ireland as Dublin competes with Cork. We compete with all the other destinations in the Republic of Ireland. When we go into the like of Enniskillen, if you're getting married in Enniskillen, you get on a bus and go across the border, and your wedding reception is going to be 10-20% cheaper when you take all these costs into it. So it's not even tourism; it's just displacement of our own people. And I suppose to me, this guy is, well, why should we care about hospitality? Look, there is a future for hospitality. All of our research says that. But why should we care then if we lose some now and sure it'll come back later? Our role in the economy, it is quite significant. We're a key element of the programme for government. And often you hear me talk, we're the backbone of tourism. I'll equate that into actual numbers, independently done. They're NISRA numbers, they're not ours. 4 out of every 5 tourism industry related job is hospitality. You ain't got tourism if you ain't got hospitality. We are a key element right across the programme for government, also for the regional development and regional prosperity. We're the people that's getting in there. We're not, it's not foreign direct investment. It's not all fancy, but it's local people creating local jobs for people that maybe aren't, mobile and can go to cities or other towns, and that's a good thing. We're also part of, we look at Derry / Londonderry and actually developing the student base. One of the key things the student looks for, yes, is a good university, but it's also a social life. Newcastle upon Tyne may be the best university in the world, I don't know, but it's also gone there because it's a party city. And and that's reality. So people aren't going to choose to go there unless there's a nice social life. We're also part of our key infrastructure. If you have a blue chip company investing and they're bringing in their people, the things they look for is education for their kids, good housing, and a good social life. And I've spoke to some people who've ended up maybe working in countries that didn't have the social element, and they didn't stay there very long, because you do want to actually have a nice life no matter where you live. And I say, it's really fundamental for our programme for government. Other elements, we have been working in partnership with government, and I'm a great believer in working in partnership with government to deliver. I think that's how things get done, but it has to be a true partnership. And look, we've done a lot of work around improving skills and career in our industry, and all credit to the further education colleges who engage with us, and the Department of Economy. Graham Wilkinson, that leads skills there, has really worked with us. We have a huge programme of co-design courses. We've already started to roll them out. We're seeing their impact where we've had courses where people unemployed, we're getting over 50% rate into employment. We're working with the prisons to develop elements there. So we're addressing the issues that the programme of government want us to. But it has to be a proper partnership. We are now left in that position where, look, yes, there's a future, but when I look across the industry, our options are very much at the minute. We'll see some people fail. We'll see another cohort contract and downsize. We'll see, and we're already seeing, some of our people that announced investments lately are going, well, that was a mistake. And I can tell you today, they're actively looking at Republic of Ireland, because when you look across the border, it's a better business model. And you also have a government there who actually see the value. And when you actually get through, you'll see in that report the number of support packages and just the attitude to taxation and working with the industry is day and night. So it does come into, if you're an entrepreneur and risking your money, we often talk about investing, we're risking it, we're putting it on the line, and you want to go somewhere that's actually working with you to do that. And look, I could beat on, as you know, I'm prone to, but we have laid out our key asks. We do need interim support, financial support. We haven't had any, as we've watched our counterparts in England and Wales do that. And look, Scotland government say they took the Barnett consequence and did other things to help the industry, but we've seen nothing at all. And it really is, and I say interim because, look, the employers' national insurance and cost stuff aren't going to go away tomorrow. So we need interim support until we actually sort out our business rate system and make it fair. We're looking again, in the budget, the Westminster government have committed for England to redo their rating system, to put into a bandit system that is more fair for different types of businesses and structures. We need that done here. We need it done now, and we've been beating that drum for quite a while, and we put in again substantial evidence to the Finance Committee for that. So look, we need that to carry across. We also, to be honest, need to see a district rate cap, because too many times now we've seen the Northern Ireland Executive actually listen to us and go for a modest increase in the regional rate, for that only to be filled with 12% increases and such in the district rate. I live in Larne, centre of the universe. I love Larne, but it's 10p. It's actually over 10p in the pound more than the City of Westminster, City of London. That's just nonsense. And I think there's only one council here that even breaks even with that, is Fermanagh, Strabane. And I appreciate they have cost pressures like we have cost pressures, but you can't keep just thinking there's the money tree. We're not a money tree. I'd also really like to say we get on and do the rate tree structure. Regarding VAT reduction, yes, it's not a devolved issue. I appreciate that. We have had, I think, all the parties in the Assembly involved in debates and show their support or voice their support for a VAT scheme that would allow a lower rate of VAT for hospitality and tourism. I have asked previously the Department of Finance, and I'm asking again, would the Department of Finance actually do their own research to back up the thing and then use that to lobby government? we have spent tens of thousands, along with our partners in GB, around VAT research. But Treasury will always say, well, that's your research, you know, and pushes away. If the executive are serious about backing us to reduce VAT for hospitality and tourism here, then we need to see the executive in that fight with us, with their own research that is done under Treasury modelling and is robust to carry that through. I missed an element, sorry, in rates. I'm leaping back. There is also currently post-COVID relief for pubs and bars and hotels. It's modelled in, they are very different modelling than any other rate system. It's called a receipts and expenditure model. The easiest term is it's based on turnover. Because of the recovery from COVID, pubs and bars were given a 20% reduction in their formula that brought their NAV down, and hotels were given 30%. That is due to end in 2016 with the new reval, or 2026. If that does, you know, it will wipe out so many, because on top of what we've got now, so that needs to continue as well. And say it is a case of we are working into London. Our sister organisation, UK Hospitality, is working very closely with us, and you know, in Westminster Daily, we have requested to meet the Secretary of State to make this case, and we will be asking, although poor people in the regions never get it, we would like to sit down with the Chancellor. You tend to find it tends to be London gets into with the Chancellor, but his action or her actions have consequences that we have to bear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colin. And as always, you're a tireless advocate for your industry and for your sector. But you make vital points, because you know this department speaks lyrically about having a tourism strategy, but there's no point having a tourism strategy if our tourists have nowhere to stay. They talk about having a regionally balanced economy, but if hospitality businesses in rural communities are forced to shut, then you're not going to have a regionally balanced economy. So the role that hospitality plays in delivering our shared ambitions of ensuring that all parts of Northern Ireland have economic success is vital to that. You make the point rightly in relation to your sector is unique in terms of its labour intensive. Part of the attraction and the charm of our hospitality sector here in Northern Ireland is our people. When visitors come to our pubs or our restaurants, one of the things that they're most blown away by is by the staff and the interaction that they have with them, but obviously that has costs. So in terms of the changes, are you saying then across all changes in terms of increasing the national insurance rate, the lowering of the threshold and the rise in the living wage, that's about, on a full-time basis, that's about £2,500 per employee in the hospitality sector? And you know, if you replicate that across you know the number of employees that you're required to have plus the number of businesses, it's just astronomical.
So, obviously full-time equivalent. We've broken down other ones with SRs to show that.
No, of course. Point that I made with Roger earlier, then have you had any discussions with the department, or have they came to you more importantly to say this is what we're bidding for the budget for next year to try and support your sector?
We've engaged with both officials in the Department of Finance and the Department of Economy. We have submitted our evidence that we share with yourself. There is an updated version of that I'll share with you, because we've been working at speed to get, and I wanted to get evidence to you rather than just turn up today without it. We are waiting on a date to meet the Economy Minister and Finance Minister, and we've also requested meetings with First and Deputy, because obviously they hold control of the Fiscal Support Act as well.
Thank you very much, sir. David.
Thank you, and thank you, Colin, as always. As the Chair said, you're absolutely passionate for your industry, and you communicate it really clearly. I just wanted to check something. I was in Dublin last weekend, my daughter's birthday, and we were out, and it was cheaper than Belfast, and actually noticeably cheaper, and I've noticed that a few times. I was in England in the summertime, and exactly the same. Is the cost in Belfast, which seemed to be quite high for food and drink, is that all of those taxations basically getting lumped and passed to? Is that the reason? Is
you basically seeing a huge chunk. I mean, if you take it, if I pick one in the pub, it's an easy one. I'm going to say pub, it's bar, it's cafe bar. You know, we have one license type. We tend to always just say pub. You know, £1 every 3 you'll spend on a pub goes in tax straight away. You know, and that's not counting all the other sub-taxes like your insurance tax and all the other bits that you don't see. And then our rate bills are just crazy. And particularly in those, you'll see restaurants are rated like a retail business, but our shops, our pubs and hotels are rated on that turnover business again. And argued that the formula used isn't balanced for the profit margins here. Now, it's similar to the formula used in GB. It's actually slightly more generous here because we lobbied for years to get food rated. Huge difference in our sector. People will measure us against a multinational. You know, you look at a sector which I'm quite proud of because it is all independents. Yeah. You look at our hotels. The majority of hotels are local people spending their money and building them. They may have an international brand on them, but they're just a franchise at the end of the day. But that changes your buying power. You know, if you're running 1 or 2 restaurants, you don't have the buying power of Wagamamas to actually be able to offset. And I think if we carry on with the taxation levels and lack of support, and I have great respect for Wagamama, don't get me wrong, but that's what you're going to end up with, because it's only people with that buying power. And look, Stephen Nolan asked me one day, well, why don't you all come together and buy together and then you have that buying power? Do we want to drink the same pint in every pub, eat the same meal in every restaurant? Because that's what buying power does. You buy the same burger to get the leverage, you buy the same draft beer or spirit. You know, the fact we have an independent industry full of small and micro businesses, I think is amazing. I think it's brilliant. It's one of our biggest tourism offer here, because people nowadays in tourism come to experience the people. You know, the nice buildings and all that, they're very nice, and I go and look at tourism sites and stuff when I go on holiday. But it's what our unique piece is, that experience with our people. And anecdotally, like there are a few of our own council and council officials need to realise that a lot of it tourism. I note one of our council head of planning the other day saying he wouldn't, on a planning application, advising the councillors that he wouldn't connect pubs to tourism. You know, 80% of all tourists go to a pub. You know, these are a vital part. And you do forget too, look,
especially if it's being used to film Game of Thrones in, which that one was.
But sorry, yes, it's
so the answer is the taxation is the
huge
driver
part of
that.
it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so are you seeing a decline in not sales but numbers through the door? Is there there's a tipping point there? Is there? Yeah.
We have, there are lots of factors, obviously cost of living crisis, all of the bits and pieces. We carry out an industry survey every quarter. It's UK wide, and then we extrapolate our figures, and actually then we have our counterparts in ROI do exactly the same survey. It's done by Nielsen CGA, so we don't play with the figures, they're very robust. We're seeing there is still a demand for hospitality because we also do a consumer one. The consumers say they're there, they just don't have the money to come out. And what we have seen in our demographic shift is we've got people coming out less because they've got less money. They concentrate on the main times. So if you turn around to me, look, I tried Saturday night, I couldn't get a restaurant. I'd not be surprised, because you don't get a restaurant because everybody's going out in one night. The trade during the week has diminished significantly. We're seeing footfall, people going home earlier and stuff, so it's a shorter visit, so they spend more. They're switching to value offers, which we have less profit margin on, so that puts pressure on again to find the money from it. It is an incredibly difficult time, and to be honest, with the announcement from the budget overnight, see the number of businesses that are for sale off the market at the minute, because they're crunching the numbers going, it's not going to work, it's not going to work, and all you keep going is, look, I've remodeled it, it's not going to work. And that, when I say that, that's not just your wee maybe family restaurant. That's I'd sell you a hotel now, Yvonne. Yeah, I've got a couple going.
Yeah. No, well, I was going to ask you about the interim support.
Do you want to buy one, David?
They go together.
Yeah.
The interim support package, you've answered that, because I was going, what's the interim? But you've answered that, you're looking at the rates. So I'm going to go, Roger mentioned two things. There are two key elements, were the Windsor Framework and corporation tax. From your industry, what are those two key issues, or can you talk us through both of them?
Corporation tax for our bigger members that are in that space, obviously, and then for investment and stuff helps with it. Sorry, what was the other one?
Windsor Framework.
Windsor Framework. Windsor Framework. If you take it, we tend to be, retail, if you like, in a sense. The Windsor Framework. On the beverage side, most of our beverage suppliers are international companies nowadays. So they're used to trading across borders, and alcohol moves bonded. So the tax and stuff, it moves freer within that. Has been some issues around like must come in and heat up pallets and stuff, so that changes, bits and pieces. And obviously, if we'd had to label product separately, it just wouldn't have added up. And an awful lot of beverage is actually canned or bottled on the island of Ireland, so it can move freely. Some are smaller people. You'll have noticed your wine list might have changed a bit because it's easier maybe to source European wines and stuff and just bring them in through the Dublin corridor. On food, it's been a huge challenge in that most of our food is from wholesalers who have, to some degree, or right across an island of Ireland footprint because the economies of scale and stuff, and also like Letterkenny, or Donegal is supplied from the north because sending a lorry from Dublin wouldn't pay anybody. What we've seen there, to be honest, is and look, things can change as modelling settles, but really all our food service people have just taken the option of take the cost hit and we run red lane, because green lane's not worth the risk. If you bring in a lorry load of perishable goods in the green lane, you're stuck with it. If you go red lane and they can trade on the Ireland, and that's really been a case of suck it up. Because look, we as an industry, an awful lot of our trade comes from our domestic market. If the Northern Ireland economy does well, we do well. So it's a case of we've had to come up what works for us, and that has primarily been in that area. It's red lane, and then we're not at any risk, but it adds cost, delay. We also have seen a change in our supply lines. Even before, if you were buying chickens in Holland, you would no longer use the land bridge. You take it down and come up and up the Dublin corridor. It just saves you all the paperwork it has, but it adds, a day life shorter in chilled product, and a day's extra travel within there. And then, being honest, where they can, they've obviously sourced the easiest direction. And it's one of those things, once you establish those supply lines, first of all, even if you change it tomorrow, they'll probably not come back. They were only established because they had to go there, but they've got those relationships now and source substitute products and stuff.
Can I just ask quickly then, the corporation, and a pretty really full answer on that, so thank you. The corporation tax, but you said just that sort of the bigger guys that would make a difference to, but whenever we talk about VAT and all the other things that we're not in control of, and national insurance and that, would that not be applicable to your smaller pub, which is most,
The VAT is by
the
much
corporation
bigger
tax,
but
yeah,
not all businesses, depending on size, are
paying corporation
tax.
Okay, I so it wouldn't
at a level, even if they are, that would substantially make a difference. That's not to say we're any way against it. We think it's actually a good lever for the economy. Therefore, we will welcome it.
All right, sir. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, and thanks, Colin. Again, it's good to see you. You're essentially describing regulatory divergence there in a hospitality way, and it's a huge risk to many of our companies. We talk about businesses taking the hit. Quite often, it doesn't end up like that. For business to rise prices, etc., and take that hit with going through a red lane, they have to pass it on somewhere, and ultimately, it's the consumer that is essentially feeling these rises, because it comes back to the essential argument, particularly around the Chancellor's budget. A lot of sympathy for hospitality, because whether you look at any of our high streets, we talked about high streets earlier and the presumed death of the high street. Well, I know I look at my own constituency, Portadown, Lurgan, Banbridge, every one of them is essentially still in survival mode. The only thing that is actually ensuring its survival at this stage is the hospitality businesses that occupy them. When I heard of the national insurance increases, I really did worry, particularly for the hospitality, because I actually accept what you're saying. I believe most people look at the rise in living wage and think that, we must compel business to pay employees fairly. And I actually think it's not an issue of compelling anybody. I believe most business owners want to pay their staff a good living wage. But essentially, you can't say that on one side, but yet take off the business on the other. They're being squeezed in both directions, which is essentially making them unviable. So I suppose I would like just maybe to develop the theme with you. Just how many hospitality businesses do you feel are at risk, or is your organisation essentially, surveyed to say post-budget, again, are we looking at a mass exodus from the hospitality sector because of viability?
I'm always careful to say this because we live in that world where we're encouraging people to come and work for us. And if I go out willy-nilly and say we're all doomed, that's stress on people who work for us, worrying is their job going to survive, and also why would I come and have a career in hospitality? These are writ off. There's nobody likes you, nobody supports you. That said, look, I'll give you from our quarterly survey just before the budget, we were seeing, and it breaks quite cleanly actually, a third were making some money, but not the same as they did last year. A third were on break even, and a third were losing money. And then you add the impact of COVID to that. I have been speaking to lots of businesses, as you would expect, they're ringing me. I'll be honest, look, I have a huge chunk of my industry wants to stand outside the door with pitchforks. They are so, and it's not because they just think that's like fun. They are so worried. The numbers don't add up. I probably could go around each one of these and you'd be able to name a coffee shop or a restaurant, whatever you've lost in your constituency. And that's the huge challenge we understand. Small and micro, not corporated, they just fade away or they retract. We've already seen since COVID, it is that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you go out for a meal, hard to find a restaurant or bar open because they've had to keep cutting back, going, well, before you subsidised those where you made money on one night, paid you to stay open. Now it's come down to, I can only open when I can actually afford to stay open. And I think we have to really always drive it home here. Profit is not a bad word. And I live in a world where it seems to be, you're making loads of money, you're making a profit. I mean, investment is risk. If a business can't make a profit, he's putting, maybe him or her putting their house on their line, their family at risk, working 60, 70 hours at times. So they should see a profit. They should see a reward. The big concern is they aren't.
And profit is growth.
Yep.
And for me, I suppose the big concern is that whether it's UK taxation policy or whether it's devolved policy decisions, we're essentially putting continual barriers to business growth, regardless of what organisation it covers. And I think that leads me on to another particular point. So later on today, you talk about one of your priorities about, making hospitality a priority for the Department for Economy. That should go on said, but essentially it's not, because we're studying a paper later today from the University of Ulster about business dynamism in Northern Ireland, and summarising the sense that essentially replacing old business with new business, which will essentially increase productivity. So how certain are your own particular industry with this sort of move towards newer style businesses, AI generated, whatever it may be? How confident are you that hospitality won't be a casualty in this, in terms of government priority as they move towards looking towards productivity?
Because we are human beings and we want to go out and interact with other human beings, and that's where you do it in hospitality. Look, you can get a meal deal from a big supermarket, you can get the best film in the world and sit down in front of it. What's the crack in that? You want to go out and meet with people, be with people. All of our consumer research continues said there is a future for us. I think the problem is what we're seeing with all these impacts is we're dismantling the infrastructure that will take years again to replace. Yep. So our tourism targets in the programme for government, they might happen, but they're going to be 20 years instead of 10 or 5. We are taking away elements in our towns and city centres and our villages, which actually are an alternative to loneliness. You've often seen things where, the old, almost like the Cheers thing, the Cheers bar, the program used to be on, and it's a row of regulars sitting at the bar, and that looks as if they're all in boozing. I say, go into many's a bar during the day, and it'll be half a dozen or 8 people who are nursing a pint, maybe for hours, because the option is to sit at home alone. And it is all of that inclusion economically. We want to pay more, we want to create careers for people, but there are lots of ordinary folk, and I count myself as ordinary folk, who maybe just want a job because they're carers, they've kids to look whatever. There's a few hours a day they can go and work.
So you would disagree with the overall policy thrust for that policy intervention should be focused on improving productivity rather than preventing business death as such. It's important that I hear the voice of the industry.
Absolutely. I mean, productivity in our world, what do you do? Say waiter run faster. Productivity in the big sense is sorting out our economically inactive, which will change our productivity scores for a country and a region. But we will, where we can, obviously look to technology and AI and stuff to help. But removing that people interface would actually remove what hospitality is.
So the rates issue is a huge question. Again, I've faced this continually from small business owners and essentially pricing them off the high street, particularly in relation to rates. So my previous experiences of rate revals are not good. I'm sure you're the same. So how confident would you be that if you want to open this conversation about rates restructuring, that we won't essentially end up in the same place where revaluations mean increased costs for businesses, particularly given the climate that we have with stretched public finances and stretched services?
My experience of rates revals are challenging, I have to say. And I have to say, there are really good people in Department of Finance who are very open with us, work with us and stuff. So it's no reflection on those people. It's that overarching sort of policy approach and stuck in the old system. We have asked several times, the like of the profit and receipt model for hotels and bars, sit down with us and actually work with us to co-design a fair formula where we can show you the differences and stuff. But that unfortunately falls on deaf ears. I think that the key thing is there's a reval on at the minute. We're just finished. The restructuring is a different animal, and if done right, it'll be a game changer. Done wrong, and it'll just be more of the same. And I say hospitality is a bricks and mortar industry. Yes, you can get your pizza delivered from an app, you can get drink delivered from an app, but you can't go out for a night on an app.
So finally, stretched public services, this is something that we hear continually, and we all know that we are living in difficult times in relation to overall budgets for the executive. The industry in general, talk about rates for a rating system, which essentially a fair rating system for any of us would be a reduced rate to allow businesses to exist, a lower corporation tax, which would allow businesses to thrive. I would argue lower corporation tax encourages business and therefore you increase the tax receipt, and the other one being essentially reduced VAT. How do you as an industry respond to those that would say you're looking to reduce the rates base at a time when government is starved of public money for public services such as health, education and others? I'd be interested to hear your...
I'm looking to increase the rate base by getting new businesses, a new economy going. Our current rate system is actually reducing the rate base because we just keep losing bricks and mortar businesses. So it's a reverse. I go to the health service, we all do. It needs money. It also needs reform because it'll take every pound you give it. It'll take every pound from the executive's budget should you give nobody any other money, just health. But you don't, because you realise there's other things need done and support it. It's a bit like the Barnett consequential money from the rate support system that Westminster put in. Yes, it went into the baseline, but it wouldn't be there if it wasn't for us needing it. And it's the same with the rates. The only way you're going to get more money out of your rates is through the like of us, who open bricks and mortar buildings or the system changes also to include online type retail and stuff. So the future of the executive budget, if you like, particularly because it's on relies on us. You can kill it or help it grow.
Thank you, Chair.
Diana?
Thank you, Chair. Colin, thank you. Yes, a lot of very concerning issues there you've raised. I've been speaking also to local hospitality providers, and they're even telling me that, as you alluded to, many of them were operating at or below even profitability for themselves, and in fact, with the upcoming wages, that they will be earning less than their employees. I mean, that's really quite shocking. But what I wanted to focus in on is the previous work being done to provide the hospitality skills in further educational colleges. That pipeline of talent coming through with the investment in that skills training. I mean, where are the opportunities going to be there within the industry when we are looking, particularly on the high street, the pubs, and even the hotels at reduced operating hours? So, I mean, have you been speaking even to the training providers, you know, with that scenario, as when you have current cohorts in training for job placement that there will be in future in the hospitality sector, Colin?
Yep, it's an area we've been particularly active in. And look, we surveying the industry, we are like everybody else competing for labour. There is a labour shortage throughout the UK. Our last quarter 4 survey showed we're sitting about a 20% vacancy rate across the industry. And I think it's about 50, 51, 52% of businesses have a vacancy or a number of vacancies. But look, that's reflective across, right across Northern Ireland, across UK. Everybody is competing for labour. It's actually obviously made labour dearer, which I suppose is a good thing for employees, because the shortage of people is a bidding thing to go through there. And we have been very active in that space of, okay, well look, how do we then compete for labour? And that is about providing good jobs that look after people's work-life balance, welfare, and then give them careers and skills path. We are part of a louder, he says I'm loud enough, larger Hospitality and Tourism Skills Board UK. It rolled out of COVID and the sector council that was set up there. Now, luckily enough, and only because we have relationships with our GB trade bodies, we're included in that. Now, most of its work in that sense is focused on GB, but we have learnings from that and stuff we can bring across. We then set up the Northern Ireland Hospitality and Tourism Skills Board NI region, which mimics the structure. It has obviously the industry on it, Department of Economy, Department of Communities, Labour Relations Agency, quite a range of other key stakeholders, and the education providers, the like of the FE colleges and the University of Ulster in particular, because they specialise in our area. And from that, I think fair to say I have seen a seismic change from government, from DFE and from the FE colleges in how we go about this. We now have a group that we sat down initially as a pilot and co-designed a couple of qualifications. I want to say co-designed, basically we said to the educators, okay guys, do not let us alter this to the point it doesn't get accredited, because we're in the space now. Any training we want getting out in the industry must be accredited. It must be a proper accrediting body and start you on that career path and knowledge path. So we co-designed 2 courses, one get into bartending and the other was get into food service. We piloted them in Belfast. Really good success rate, all oversubscribed. You weren't paid to come on it. We had only one student, I use that word loosely because the age range, only one person didn't come back to finish the course, and they actually said, look, I can't come, can I come on another one to finish it? Because what we did is we took it out of FE colleges into actual premises. So if you were pulling a pint of Guinness, you actually were pulling a pint of Guinness. If you were actually serving a meal, you were actually serving a proper meal that had been cooked and stuff in a proper restaurant. And out of those, we were getting over 50% into work. because again, each one of them, with employers with vacancies come in and talk to them and stuff. And look, we had people, even in the pilots, we did it in Belfast, because Belfast Met is the curriculum hub for all the colleges. So we develop it with them, and it goes out in all the colleges. And we did it in Belfast, we thought, well, look, denser population and stuff for those. We had people coming from the north coast up around Coleraine. We had people coming from Armagh and stuff to go on them, and they weren't getting paid to be there. So really positive out of that. We managed to get DFE to back funding to run them out, and we did them, each college did a number of those. We're now in a process of co-designing a full suite. If you like, those get into, there was another one there to get into tourism. And again, we had problems there, tourism, and I had to fund it because of the way it fell in the department, which I don't think it should have. It again was incredibly successful. We're expanding that suite of get intos. We'll add barista and another few. And those are very much aimed at a qualification for somebody who is unemployed or just coming into the work. And a lot of it is getting that qualification, but also confidence and stuff with it. In that further back chain, and again working along with a number of our members have created the Northern Ireland Hospitality School. Basically it's Ballymena area, because they're working with the Gallagher Trust where they can get funding, and we put some money in the pot there. So we have now, in partnership with the business community, the local council and a number of other stakeholders, funded a pilot programme on the world of work in primary schools, which is now currently running. We again have a programme for with the I get this wrong, it's short, Northern Region College, the Ballymena area, on a programme for people who are far away from work. It's a 5-week programme, and that pilot has just come to an end and been again rated quite successfully. And then on the other side of stuff, to create career paths and upskill people in our industry. Obviously there's the apprenticeships and there's the higher level apprenticeships and stuff, but there's that gap. How do we get them from there to there? So we've looked at it and co-designed a full suite of courses that are like stepping stones, and again all accredited. Some will be a few days, some will be a few weeks, so we're spread out part-time. And those are to create those stepping stone qualifications where you start to amass a suite of qualifications in our industry, and again give you that, back in that experience of learning. And to be honest too, also to help some of our industry or small and micro to get involved with training and actually understand that people may come into our industry and if I'm a small business, they may stay with me 3 or 4 years and then move on to a bigger one because that's a career path, and that's okay. Because let's be honest too, if somebody is trained in wine, if they can pronounce the wine, they can upsell the wine, so that actually helps you make a better profit. The same in Jonathan spoke earlier on digital skills. We're actually doing digital skills a course in it. We're doing bespoke hospitality profit and loss, because again, if we're promoting people in our industry, what can happen is you're short of staff, you promote too quickly and they don't have the skills. Your manager, your supervisor needs to understand profit and loss. And back with all of that, we're also building in succession planning, because in a small business world, succession plan, obviously you have to think about maybe to pass on to your family. Your family might not want it. So you want to make sure your chef or your bar manager or whoever wants to buy your business when you're retiring. And to do that, they need the skills and the business skills to do that. So there's a full raft, and sorry, I'm going on a bit long there, but we're going right from primary school right through. And look, the primary school and the world of work stuff is a long way away of fruition. It'll take ages to change that thing, but we watch the IT sector do it and say, well, if they can do it, we can do it. And I alluded earlier, we've had a number of, we've been working on a pilot approach with Highbank, the young offenders and women's prison there, about bringing into people work. And I actually say I must really happy some of the successes there. So we've now been talking to the Director General and are now again working with the business community in building up a more formal scheme for all our prisons. One of the things I would say, which really annoyed me the other day, we had a young male coming out of Highbank, and it's that initial stage, that come out, had secured him a job in Belfast. The young chap comes from the northwest, I'll not say where. Secured him a job, going to be taken on, and then it was, we can't get any housing for him there, going to have to go back and live where he came from, where possibly no one will be harder to get them work, and then it can spiral into the same problems as before maybe. And so we've got to have the infrastructure behind it. But look, I must admit I'm seeing positive approaches from DFE around the whole skill up. Obviously we have the wellbeing and development promise now, and that's about treating people well, making sure they have the work-life balance. We now provide counselling on a range of subjects, mental health being one of them, free of charge to anybody that works in our industry. I don't care if you're a member, I don't care if you're the lorry driver delivering this stuff or whatever. So we want to create a really healthy pace. We have to compete with all the other sectors, but I think there's a really good career path. And so look, another chunk of our industry will come and stay a while, because there may be students, and I probably go around here, probably everybody worked in hospitality as a student or at some time in their life, whether that be in a coffee shop, bar, restaurant or whatever, hotel. We still have to give those people the skills. A skill that we give thousands upon thousands of people, which I think goes unnoticed, is their social skills. I know a couple of our big finance houses now. If you apply to one of the big finance houses, everybody's got a 1-1. You're a superstar 1-1 when you get it, but when you go into that room, everybody competing for that same job. They're scanning down to see if you worked in hospitality or retail. Have you got social skills? Have you got teamwork and skills? Have you got skills to deal with different customers? And funny enough, I noticed in our Get Into courses, when I went down and sat with the students and stuff just to see how it was going, a lot of them was about, didn't have the confidence, didn't have the skill. We have now a generation come through who spend an awful lot more time isolated on gaming stations, on gadgets, in their rooms. Their social skills aren't there, their confidence to deal with people. So a lot of we'll bring through won't stay with us, and that's okay. We're passing them on to other sectors who need the skills we've just given them, particularly those social skills.
Whenever I need to filibuster legislation in the chamber, I'm bringing you in. It is all very important stuff. It is very important stuff. Sinead.
We've covered a lot of ground. So, honestly, Colin, you are a great champion for your industry, and that goes without saying. And hospitality is the backbone of our tourism industry. It is also the anchor of the vitality of our towns and cities. Without our pubs and restaurants, we would be all the more, I suppose, at loss. However, we have they have been impacted by the pandemic, the cost of living, the inflationary rates, and all of that, and we've covered them quite significantly. But I also would have to say the disposable income of our families has really been hit hard because of all of those reasons as well. And that is why it's really important that we do see the living wage go up as well, but we need to see the impact that it has. So there's two sides to that particular story, and I am concerned about the hospitality industry because I know it has remodelled itself. I mean, you go into your towns and cities on a Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday, you'd be hard put to get your smaller restaurants opening and functioning, and that leaves the place much bleaker than we would like. So what I'm saying to you, when you made your initial opening statement, I think you said about partnership about 5 or 6 times in relation to partnership with government, and you also indicated that you had produced papers and you're going to send us your updated papers to Department of Finance and to the Department for the Economy. How important is it, sending papers is one thing. How important is that engagement that we're doing today as a committee and you're doing in front of us as a collective? How important is that at a higher level in order to address the key issues that you have? For example, business rates. It has been the bane of the business community for decades. and it still exists in its current model. And because of all the other impacts that have happened, it's even worse now, because that is where relief can go in and help support and soften some of those other areas. We do need to get wages up for those that are working in the sector, because it's important that your industry is attractive to those people so that they learn those skills and pass those skills on and that service on to our customers. So that is important. But how important is it that you support the businesses to do that at that higher level with business relief, and how important is those partnerships to you with government? And that's not just talking to a committee, it's actually engaging with the policy and strategy of the government right at the heart of it.
First of all, look, I'll agree with you. Look, and I think I said it earlier, everybody wants to pay more. We need to see all of our people properly rewarded and incentivised. You know, because we are a people industry. Without them, you know, you've just got a lot of empty rooms and tables. That, you know, paying the high level has consequences. You've got to find it from somewhere. You know, because our industry is not fat cats. You know, a lot of them don't even. You know, I'm talking to a coffee shop owner during the weekend. There hasn't had a wage in a year because, you know, there's not the money to pay herself. You know, so. And that's why we'd have much rather seen, you know, the rise in the national living wage and then a reduction in employers' national insurance to help us pay that. Because when the national wage goes up, you know, Westminster gains. They get more income tax. They reduce the level of benefits they're having to pay out. So we're delivering that. But to take it out the back as well, you're stopping us actually paying more with it. So, look, really in that space, partnership working is vital. If you know, just look at the programme for government, and it lays down, you know, government have no money and no businesses. The programme for government is sitting down saying, here's what our tourism sector is going to do, here's what our hospitality sector is going to do. You know, we'll go off and do it without any help, without any support, without actually working out how it's supposed to be done. You know, sitting down in partnership, and look, there is now a new tourism partnership board. It has met a few times now, 4 times I think it is, to develop a new tourism action plan, which is a good step in the right direction. You mentioned papers and stuff. You know, I learned, particularly during COVID, was the line, "In God we trust, everybody else bring data." So I spend an absolute fortune now on economists and tax experts and financial experts to produce those papers. To get them down to 7 or 8 pages actually is quite a skill, because the amount of data we bring in. But they're a waste of time if nobody's reading them, and even more a waste of time if nobody's actually using that knowledge to do anything. And that's where we're sitting in the room. We can pick apart that data with them, we can explain it, we can understand their challenges and find a way to deliver. But I mean, we do need to fix the model, and I say it's not much of a partnership if we're the only one in it.
Yeah, I think that's a big message as well. And just on data, because you mentioned it as well in the earlier presentation, you know, the Fiscal Council or the Fiscal Commission found that that devolution of tax was unlikely to be viable, owing to the difficulty of obtaining information on the current VAT receipts for Northern Ireland. Should we be doing more to actually research and have our own data, so that we actually can cost what the reduction would actually be? Because we talk about it and then everybody says it's too prohibitive, but nobody has the facts and figures behind it. So how do we know?
And that's like, we, along with our counterparts, GEO, spent tens of thousands on the VAT research. And that's why one of our asks is, can the Department of Finance do their own research that hopefully then Westminster will actually engage better? But also, if we have the Northern Ireland Executive true to their words, with all the parties backing a VAT reduction in hospitality and tourism, how are you making that argument if you don't have the data? You know, because you don't even have my data, because I've been given that to Westminster. So I think it is key. The devolution of certain taxes, maybe shoot me in the foot here, I think we need to be sure that they're actually done, that there are fiscal controls, that we spend our money wisely in a devolved government. What I'd hate to see is more taxes and still nothing resolved, because that just means more taxes. So it is about good fiscal controls when you bring them in. And I have no particular position whether VAT remains with Westminster Control or comes here. If it's actually done properly, takes account of regional difference, and actually based on data.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Glenn, certainly last but not least, as I know this is another very busy time for your membership. Christmas would not happen without our independent retailers on our high streets, and no doubt I'll be visiting them on the 24th of December when I start and complete my Christmas shop. But again, your industry is very labour intensive, and importantly so. And again, one of the great things about bringing people onto our high streets is that eclectic mix of independent retailers that are really attractive to bringing people onto our high streets. So from your perspective, Glenn, do you want to give an opening statement about the impact that these changes have had upon your membership and our small independent retailers across Northern Ireland?
Sure, thank you for the opportunity. I think you and your members, indeed all MLAs, received the open letter signed by some 25 business organisations, chambers of commerce, business improvement districts, representing every village, town and city in Northern Ireland. This is an unprecedented coalition of business groups representing tens of thousands of local businesses, contributing billions to our local economy. And you rightly focused on the recent UK budget, and it has increased the cost of doing business crisis for high street businesses to beyond crisis point, resulting in thousands of businesses facing uncertain futures, scaling up plans cancelled, and additional employment opportunities put on hold. And indeed, speaking to our members, and we're about to conduct a detailed survey on the impact of this budget, already we have members tell us that they were planning to scale up in 25, did the math in terms of the impact of what the budget would have on their business in terms of national insurance, and it didn't stack up. So that is people whose jobs will be denied, working people that will not have a job opportunity, and we're told that this whole budget was about supporting working people. But it compounds an already difficult situation because small business owners in Northern Ireland are already paying the most expensive business rates in the UK by a country mile. And obviously the Chancellor adding to this burden by increasing employers' national insurance will have a negative impact on local jobs, the viability of businesses, and restrict the growth of the economy. And if you add in the hike with the 6.7% increase in the living wage, that's a huge cost for businesses to absorb. And as my colleagues have recently highlighted, in previous years, England small businesses received a 75% reduction in their rates to assist with the cost of doing business crisis. And despite the UK government giving this to Northern Ireland as part of the Barnett Consequential, local businesses did not receive a single penny of reduction in their rates bills, with the money going elsewhere in the Stormont budget. And further to that, we saw local and regional rates increase. And the Chancellor, in her recent budget, announced that this rates relief would continue for 40% for other high street businesses. And in our letter, the 26 business organisations collectively call for the Minister to use the Barnett Consequential of this scheme to provide appropriate rates relief for those businesses in Northern Ireland. The Finance Minister, in question time yesterday, said that the Barnett Consequential of this was 58 million. And on that there, and obviously you can check Hansard in terms of what exactly she said, has already indicated that this money will not be going to local businesses. And as my colleagues have said, the reasons why the UK government put that money there is because there was a need, there was a challenge there was businesses that were failing. And of course, we could have the worst of all scenarios, absorbing the national insurance increases, and no rates relief. And in fact, I worry greatly about the hike in the forthcoming hikes in local and regional rates as well. And what we want is for that money to be reinvested back into the high street, back into local jobs and local businesses. We've requested meetings with the various ministers. We're meeting with the Finance Minister next week. We're working on a date with the Economy Minister. Nothing as yet from the First and Deputy First Ministers. But I do not think it is unreasonable to argue for the same level of rates relief that small high street businesses receive in Brighton or Bolton to apply equally in Ballymena, Banbridge and all of our local villages, towns and cities. And the fundamental question is this: why should we accept Northern Ireland being treated so differently from other parts in the UK? We've heard a lot of people talk about the Irish Sea border in relation to the protocol and the Windsor framework. It's very clear that there's now a business rates border in the Irish Sea. And a further question needs to be asked of the UK government. If they are serious about growth, why did they burden small businesses, our engine room of our economy, with such a regressive tax which will do the very opposite? And indeed, unless further rates relief and other reductions in the tax burden are given, we'll not be able to secure the growth and the better jobs that will ultimately transform our economy and our public services. And political leaders both here and at Westminster need to get real with the severity of the cost of doing business crisis. And for many of our members, this is no longer a cost of doing business crisis. This is now an emergency. And we cannot duck any longer the fact that we have a broken, antiquated, expensive system of business rates which is simply not fit for purpose, which is a dead hand on our economy, our high streets, and we will never achieve the economic potential of this region while we have this system of broken, antiquated business rates. And there's a real frustration, Chair, amongst our members at the lack of delivery from the executive. And of course, members here rightly mentioned about the High Street Task Force. I was one of the chairs of that. That was a real good success story in the last mandate of this Assembly. Some 33 business, trade union, voluntary sector, all of the main parties, every local council supporting a plan, a 5-year reconstruction plan. And I am beyond frustration at why this executive has not recalled that High Street Task Force. Not that that itself is an end in itself, but it is the coordinating body across business and other key stakeholders to move forward that 5-year reconstruction plan. I have no idea why it has not been recalled or reassembled. Successive debates in the chamber, questions, and the TEO continually obfuscate. And of course, what we want to in business is be co-designers. We want to be partners and not just consultees. And that's the key point in the programme of government. And of course, for the executive, it has to be more than just existing. It has to deliver. And doing nothing, Mr. Chairman, is not an option. We don't need tea sympathy anymore. We need action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn. And direct as always, but that's important given the importance of the issue. So 2 questions for me. Firstly, have your members done any work in terms of what the impact or average impact would be for their business, say per employee, in terms of the changes? Would it be similar to those that Colin have articulated?
Well, it's very clear that obviously there's going to be significant cost burden of the national insurance increases. Previously, when I was in front of this committee, I talked about the growing problem of crime against our members. Since we've last heard, that situation is getting worse. We are at an all-time high of shoplifting. In fact, one member told me there not so long ago that his losses in shoplifting are now equal to his rates bill. And add in, the crippling cost of business rates, the increase in national insurance, and all of those other cost issues, and jobs and businesses will be at risk. Certainly, I know expansion plans are at risk. And the thing is, what this will all do is contract the rate space, and means that ultimately there's going to be less money going into public services from our respective members. And that's why this issue of the 58 million that is there for rates relief No ifs or buts. That should be given to those businesses to secure jobs, to secure business, and to secure our high street. And I think you can tell that I'm frustrated in this. What is the frustration of the businesses, the thousands of businesses that Retail and I represent? They are at their wits' end trying to make a business viable, to secure our high streets, to secure local jobs, to support local suppliers. And they cannot do that. I think it was John, it was your party leader said that businesses are being taxed to death. He is absolutely right.
Oh, and that is, I just wanted to then pick up in terms of the rates, although outside of the remit of this committee, the Finance Minister has missed the deadline for this year for changes to the rate proposals for next year. That was confirmed at the Finance Committee last week. She hasn't put out to consultation the changes which she could have. Small business rates relief is obviously still in place and important. The Minister hasn't given any indication as to the changes that she's proposing, but just wanted to get your view of the importance of the current reliefs that are in place and the need to maintain.
Well, I think that the current reliefs are important, but they can be taken away. We've saw when the Assembly went down things like the rural ATM rates relief, the business bonus scheme, that fell. We couldn't persuade the Secretary of State then to pass it through Westminster. I think reliefs are important, and I think, but they're not the only thing. It is the crippling cost of business rates. I was very struck when Colin talked about Larne, and actually what that translates into is that probably in poundage terms, businesses in Oxford Street in London are paying less than businesses in Larne. How on earth did we ever arrive at a situation like that? So don't get me wrong, fixing business rates is not a silver bullet for the challenges facing our high streets. It is what is in the High Street Task Force, is that collective effort addressing public transport. It's about addressing car parking. It's about ensuring that we get the right infrastructure spend. We get the right investment into our town and city centres. It's about creating an ecosystem in our high streets, which retail, hospitality are two parts of it, but ensuring that we have clean, green, family-friendly destinations that you can't get online. But until we fix planning, until we fix business routes, we're not going to get the necessary support there. We're not going to grow the potential. I know that we have so much good in our high streets, and it could be so much better. It could contribute to our tourism strategy, growing our economy as a whole. But unless we address this cost of doing business crisis, not only will it hit our Indigenous base, goodness knows what on earth will that mean if we're trying to attract foreign direct investors, if we have this crippling level of business rates.
Thank you. Kate?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. I think you've all made such a compelling case for the impact of the budget, and the disparity in support, but also the range of pre-existing barriers which exist, and that really is something for us to consider. Glyn, you've done so much work, and I know you were personally so involved in the High Street Task Force. My personal view, which was recently endorsed by the Assembly, is that TEO is not the place for the High Street Task Force. If we actually want to see some delivery on it, then I personally feel it really needs to come under the remit of the economy. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to the 33 businesses who are involved in this work and not seeing any movement, and what confidence in us as an Assembly in the ability to deliver is like right now?
Well, I think that I was always put on the spot by Stephen Nolan. Where's the High Street Task Force report? It was, when it was published, it was a really good example of this place doing partnership working. Not just partnership between 4 or 5 political parties, but also partnership right across civic society. It was a co-design effort. 33 33 civic society organisations, councils, the main political parties, the key government departments, a 5-year reconstruction plan. And it was envisaged the High Street Task Force would remain in existence for those 5 years as the coordinating body, the communication body. What we understand now is individual departments are doing it in isolation. And because the High Street and addressing the challenges of the High Street is a cross-departmental, that's always where the difficulty is. Now, it was the 2 junior ministers that were the co-chairs of it, because the TO as a coordinating role. We don't care which department puts it together, as long as it's put together, and it's not an end in itself, it is a means to an end. It is about coordination, it's about communication, because in relation to the challenges faced in high streets, our three organisations are equally part of that. We have KPIs there, we have responsibilities to change there, and it took us, and for the life of me, I do not understand why this executive has not recalled the High Street Task Force, because it was one of the few things in the last mandate that they got really right. And I have colleagues in London and Dublin looked at that report and said we would never get that type of consensus if we tried to put that same structure together. So I think we need, at the very least, we need to have that recalled. And we need to, what I would encourage, Chair, is this committee to do an inquiry on the cost of doing business, because it has got beyond breaking point for many family-owned independent retailers and small businesses generally.
It's so interesting, and the earlier point around data, I was really struck with that. We're setting up a new all-party group on public data and policy on Thursday. Many members are interested in being a part of it. And actually, Northern Ireland is really data rich. The problem is, because the departments all tend to work in silos, there isn't a sharing of that, and so we're not making better policy on the basis of it. So I think you made a very clear case that business is in a really difficult position, and yes, the budget which has come from Westminster has had an impact, but there have pre-existing barriers which are there, and so how we can actually assist you is in addressing these things, and there are so many suggestions from the sector. So thank you for your time.
And just to follow up, the programme for government shouldn't just be a deal between four political parties. It needs to be a co-design effort with civic society, and that means that we're there as partners, because in terms of all those indicators that are there in the programme of government, the business community have a key role to play to help deliver those objectives, and that's an entirely new way of working. So the key word going forward is co-design.
And you were right in that being the task force as being a brilliant example of partnership, and we see it with councils, and given our size it lends so well, so there's actually no excuse for us to work as separately as we do. The three of you have made really strong cases today, so thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Sinead?
Glenn, I support your call for a concentration on how we deal with the business rates, and it's been going on for forever and a day. I remember in my previous role with the finance minister of the time, which was Martin O'Muller, who indicated that he was seriously looking at various models and remodelling and negotiation with the Chancellor at the time in the UK, but nothing ever came of it. Obviously we had a collapse of government shortly thereafter as well. I don't think that we can really get to the bones of all of the issues that we've talked about today in relation to the challenges and the opportunities of the hospitality trade and our small business community if we don't look at the rates model as it exists. It is archaic, and it's based on a spatial kind of type of strategy, and it just doesn't work. The world has moved on from all of that. But I think back to what we're talking about again is the partnership. It's government, how government here, how our executive interacts with the experts in the industry and then in the sector. And we're hearing very strongly from the hospitality sector here today, but it applies in other areas of government as well. And to ignore it is just to ignore the obvious. And I think, we've got really good examples where co-design has worked significantly well whenever you've developed strategies like the End Violence Against Women and Girls. It was very immersive, it was very inclusive, and it went out and spoke to those in our communities. And we need to do the same again. We had it, we had the model, and the ball has been dropped in this mandate as well. So we need to get back. And there has been 2 or 3 motions that have gone through the Assembly and has endorsed that. So there's wide party support for re-establishing that. And I think it's up now to the executive collectively to get on with it. And there's recommendations and a pathway and a plan for the next 5 years in the previous mandate, and I think we just need to get on with it. And I would just want to thank you for coming today and being as strong and as forceful and great advocates for your combined sectors.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Glenn. The frustration, maybe is the best way of description, or is you articulate it really clearly, really well. All three of you do, and it's frustrating to have conversations over and over and over and not see movement. But I'm just you pricked a thought in my head there, and I just want to explore it for a wee second. The rate-based change you're going, we can say, and Johnny articulated about the Labour government and the manifesto. They went for change, and they are, regardless of whether you agree with it or not, but it's change is what they're doing, and then we're seeing the pain of that. If you're to look at rates, and you're changing that for the high street or hospitality or right across, if the amount of money that we can generate is a kind of fixed amount, if we're lowering, and I totally agree with progressive taxation, so I'm not saying we don't. Where does somebody's going to pay more if somebody pays less? Where are you suggesting that comes from? Is that widened, or?
Well, firstly, there is that 58 million that is there, okay. And as Colin rightly said, there is a need for transitional relief to stabilise the situation in the short term. Medium to long term, there needs to be a fundamental reconstruction of the rating system. We also need to look at the reliefs as well. Yeah. We need to have a proper targeted approach to the small business rate relief scheme, because unbeknownst, MLA's office is qualified for the small business rate relief scheme. We need to make sure we have a much more targeted approach to the high street. I think as well there's things like the empty premises relief as well. In many respects that scheme is subsidising dereliction, where landlords find so many creative ways to get around not paying rates now. And if each of your constituencies will have so much derelict. Yeah. We have the highest shop vacancy rate in the UK. That scheme, I know that's something that's probably a low-hanging fruit for the Finance Minister. I think that will probably bring in about 20 million. So you can see, looking at a much more strategic way at the rating system, you could get changes. The poundage issue is something that needs to be looked at as well. But I also think that in terms of that broader joined-up approach, like whatever happens to the future of levelling up, making sure all of those funding streams, from the Shared Island Fund to successor to levelling up, to what the councils do, to what the executive does, all of the different investment streams need to be aligned. And that obviously includes the city and growth deals as well. And we all need to make sure that we get that investment into our high streets, because when you invest in the high street, whether you locate an office or anything that there, you're creating footfall, you're creating vitality, and you get more bang for your buck when you locate a business, put investment into our high streets. And I think as well the Economy Minister is absolutely right about the sub-regional divide. Many of our members in small rural towns feel completely left behind, and in many respects that sense of where the infrastructure investment in many of those rural towns, the transport links are very poor. They have it compounded with all the difficulties I've talked about, but also feeling left behind. So there's a need to get not just a partnership approach within this august body, but also with our councils, all the different funding streams. Governments at every level need to be aligned about how we can get the step change we need in our high street. I believe we can do it if we have the right partnership approach, the right solution-based approach, the right coordination and policy. I do believe, and I wouldn't be doing this job if I didn't believe we could turn this around. But the Assembly and Executive needs to be much more delivery focused. It's not enough for the Assembly Executive just to pat itself on the back and say, look, we're still here, we're still existing. But it needs to now seriously deliver, because the business community was the strongest advocate for the Assembly and Executive to be reconstituted and recalled. But it's now up to each and every one of you, each and every minister, to start to deliver.
Thank you. I completely agree with that. The default should be that shouldn't even be in question, that the Assembly isn't functioning, isn't there? And that sort of picked on, you've answered it really thoroughly, and that's sort of in the medium term. On the short term, now you talked about the 58 million, and you know, and you talked about emergency, and it was emergency. What if we're collectively to look at something as a committee that would instantly help? What does that look like?
Well, start point's obviously the 58 million that's there.
What does it look like, delivery of that?
Well, obviously that's something we would need to work out. Obviously there's an NAV of 110,000, I think, in the English system. We'd need to work it out differently here. I do acknowledge, and the Finance Minister, her credit, has said, it's slightly different here because we have a higher density of small business. We have a higher density of independent retailers than we have in any other part of the UK. But I think, you know, we could find creative ways to use that 58 million to support high street businesses and at the very least to offset the national insurance hikes as well. So I think even in the short term, if we get that transitional relief, that would stabilise the situation greatly.
Just to go, so what does that, in practice, what does that look like? And I'm totally agreeing with you, but I'm saying, what is that, if we were to go, you know, we need a scheme and it's this, what does that scheme look like?
Well, I wish I had more time to go into detail, but I suppose the best analogy I could use is during COVID, because each of us were very hands-on and working with the Finance Minister, working with LPS to come up with schemes, rates relief schemes, grants and other things, whatever, that had a great impact. And, you know, let's not forget, I know the Finance Minister did try, or Conor Murphy when he was Finance, to try and get that COVID relief continued on. He did keep it going for as long as possible. So when there's a right partnership approach, looking at creative solutions, we can get that relief. So, but the thing, what we've got to get as a starting point is agreement from the executive that 58 million will be used in the way it's used in England and Wales. And why should businesses in this part of the UK be treated so differently to other parts of the UK? Why is that? And I think that's not an unreasonable request to make, is give us what other parts of the UK have. Why should we be treated, and our members be treated so differently?
Absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. It should not. But what I'm saying is, if you have 58 million, what way is that delivered out to the business? That's what I'm...
Well, I wouldn't go much beyond what is there in England in terms of independent retail, hospitality and leisure. I think those are good basic points. If we get that, and we get what's offered in England, that's a good start.
Okay.
Thank you, David. That brings to an end of questions. Sorry, Philip, you just wanted to make a comment, sir?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, everybody's very passionate about the impact that the Labour budget has had here, and rightly so. And I mean, I don't think there's any disagreements along those issues. And I think what we're clearly hearing today is that despite, you know, the Finance Minister achieving greater budget from Westminster, that we just don't have the money. You know, we're underfunded here in the north. The executive doesn't have the money to do the things that it needs to do. I mean, the 58 million, you know, it would be great if it was ring fenced and could go to supporting small businesses, but and I'm not arguing one way or the other in relation to that, but it's clear, you know, if we take 58 million and put it to one direction, it's coming out of another direction. And the underlying factor in all of this, over and above the impact that the British government budget will have on businesses and other sectors across the north, is that our public services are still suffering, as they have been for 10 years, because of a lack of investment from Westminster and a lack of budgetary. I mean, that's not negating the executive and the ministers having to make decisions about where funding go. That's really something that obviously needs to happen. And Chair, one final point, because there's been a lot of conversation today about rates, and obviously it's not for this committee, it is for the Finance Committee, but you know, you flagged up a consultation that hasn't went out yet from the Finance Minister, whenever she clearly articulated yesterday in the Assembly that one of the reasons for that was that she hasn't got her paper on discussion on rates before the executive. I think it's been knocked back 4 times by the DUP, and I think it's important that, because you raised that issue, that I clarify that point.
No problem at all, Philip. And I'll not get into a political retort, because I think the key in all of this is that we all speak with one voice. That
Maybe, Chair, just on Philip's point, Philip, through the chair, I mean, that money was given by the UK government because of the need for it in terms of the cost of doing business crisis. And I think that's why I'm not asking for anything else that any other part of the UK has not got. And as has been previously articulated, the Welsh government similarly adopted it slightly different. The Scottish government did something different. So all I'm asking is for the executive here to work with us, come up with a scheme that helps support those businesses, and I think we can stabilise the situation, because ultimately what will happen is more businesses will go to the wall, more businesses will contract, and that will mean that there is less money that goes into the regional rate or the local rate, and it will mean ultimately that public services have less money, and that is something none of us want to see. And I absolutely understand the finance minister. She has the most difficult job in politics. But we, as a business community, we're full of ideas, we're full of solutions, and we've put a number of those ideas down in our submission to the programme for government.
Thank you.
And I mean, absolutely. And I mean, you used the example of COVID when the executive worked very closely and ministers worked very closely devising schemes to help and support businesses through that. So, I mean, I'm not arguing that there shouldn't be greater cooperation between businesses and the executive ministers. You know, there are problems there that we need to deal with, and we obviously support our businesses and our high streets and our hospitality and our tourism sector. So, you know, we absolutely need to find a solution that supports the best of our sector. I'm just clearly pointing out that, you know, if we were in an infrastructure committee today, or we're in the health committee today, or we're the education committee today, I would be making the same point. The underlying point is that the executive doesn't have the money that we need to do all of these things, and that's a very difficult position to be in.
Thank you for that, Philip. And Glenn, I'll disagree with you. The hardest job in politics is keeping you three gentlemen on the time which you were allocated. But no, listen, it's very, very important and very useful. We have the economy minister here next week, and I think all members will be seeing what he is proposing to have in place for the 31st of March for you guys, and that'll be the question that we'll be having. Roger,
can I just close on one thing then? There's talk about co-design of solutions, and the minister will probably talk about that as well. I think that's great up to a point, but there has to be accountability for delivery. Yes. And I think if you want a case study, go back to the flooding issue where it's been passed around and the money was there. So money's not an issue in that case. Money was there. Delivery is what has let it down. So I think, and the final point on that, I suppose, to your point, sir, is that if we want somebody else to pay less, it could mean somebody else has to pay more, or it could mean we actually spend the money we've got better. And I think that's where we need to focus, is not just keeping going back to the well, but actually doing what we do with what we've got better. And that goes back to the accountability point. Thank you.
I think that was very useful, gentlemen. Thank you very much for that. Could the committee just suspend at this stage for a short period, please? Sorry, I'm not going to emulate the other chair. Can I get the agreement of the committee that we suspend? Yeah,
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30, 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 sound.
Okay, we're now going to read item 7, members, which is the briefing from the UUEPC, and I apologise firstly for our delay, but delighted to welcome our guests here. If I could welcome them forward. Gareth Hetherington, who'll be known to many of us, who's the Director of Economic Policy, and Dr. Karen Bunner, who's the Principal Economist at the Centre. Also, colleagues, firstly, again, my apologies for keeping you waiting, but a very, very important evidence session, and we look forward to hearing from you. So we hand over to you at this stage.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, or good afternoon as it is now. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to speak very briefly by way of background before handing over to Dr. Bonner. As some of you may know, the UUEPC has now been providing independent economic advice to policymakers and politicians for over a decade. We conduct research across a number of work streams on devolved policy areas, such as the labour market, which includes analysis on skills needs of the economy and in re-engaging the economically inactive. We provide support to local government, for example, with their City and Growth Deal bid, and there are other strategic areas of interest, including rates revenue and providing advice on targeting reliefs to sectors most impacted by the pandemic. And more recently, we undertook demographic analysis to help inform infrastructure investment. So in addition to that, we also have a work stream focusing on business-related research, which is led by Dr. Bonner. This is a long-established area of research for us and has covered areas such as management leadership training in Northern Ireland SMEs and supporting the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor research in Northern Ireland. Chair, we've sent through 2 reports for your committee to consider. The first is Business Dynamism in Northern Ireland, which looks at business births, deaths and productivity levels, and the second is Job Creation in Northern Ireland Firms. Now, it's important that these are considered together because although the Dynamism report highlights lower levels of business creation and productivity in Northern Ireland, which is perhaps a less optimistic finding, the Job Creation report recognises the very important role new starts play in creating jobs, which is a much more positive finding, which hopefully again gives more balance to the evidence session. So with that, I'll now hand over to Dr. Bonner.
Thank you, Chair, for your invitation to discuss business dynamism excuse me, and SME support with your committee, and good afternoon, everyone. I have a short opening statement outlining some key comments and observations which hopefully helps to inform your work. Business dynamism is a concept comprising various elements of economic activity, business births and deaths, their growth and contraction, and the corresponding impacts on job creation and destruction. Steady or increasing rates of dynamism in the form of business birth and death are regarded as an indication of a healthy and growing economy. This is because business churn is an essential characteristic for a productive and innovative business environment. It enables new pioneering businesses, such as those with new technology, to replace outdated firms and drive them out of the market, with resources then reallocated to more productive firms. Business dynamism, therefore, has positive impacts on innovation, competition, productivity and job creation. So we have looked at the concepts of business dynamism and job creation across 2 separate research reports. I will draw on some key points from both. So first, the relevant points arising from the business dynamism research report are business churn in Northern Ireland in the form of business births plus deaths has increased between 2010 and 2021, but the churn rate remains persistently lower than that of the UK. In fact, Northern Ireland has the lowest business birth rate and business death rate of the UK constituent countries. This was consistent over the 2010 to 2021 period, suggesting a persistently less dynamic economy. There was a post-pandemic rise in business births in Northern Ireland with a peak of 6,600 births in 2021, and this increase was in line with elsewhere in the UK. The drop back in 2022 has resulted in almost equal numbers of business births and deaths in Northern Ireland, and at fewer than 100 additional firms in the economy in 2022. It also points to a slow-growing business population. Typically, there is a higher business churn within the service sector compared to manufacturing due to lower capital and resource requirements for entry, amongst other reasons. With the exception of the information and communication sector, the highest business birth rates were in sectors whose productivity lies below the Northern Ireland average, such as transport, accommodation and food, and business administration and support. There were also lower business birth rates in high productivity sectors such as finance and insurance and production. And the average productivity of business births in Northern Ireland was around 27% lower than that of business births in the UK. The analysis also points to low levels of innovation amongst business births. In fact, where innovation was being undertaken, it appears to be mostly new to the Northern Ireland market innovation rather than the more radical new to the world innovation, and wider research suggests that it is that latter new to the world which is typically associated with productivity growth. Finally, as an overall observation on this report, we found only weak evidence of a positive relationship between the business birth rate and productivity. The lower levels of business churn and lack of more innovative business births is likely to be contributing to poorer productivity outcomes in the economy. So I will now draw on a few key points from the job creation report, which are also relevant to the business dynamism discussion. So although there may be no notable initial productivity impacts from business births, we do find that new businesses do drive job creation. So when analysing job creation over firms' lifetime, we find that the majority of jobs are created in the business's birth year, and subsequent job creation takes place primarily in the first few years after business birth, highlighting the importance of young firms. And this is also consistent with wider research, which suggests that it is young firms rather than necessarily small firms which create most jobs. So the average size of firms at birth is very small, with fewer than 5 employees on average, and we find that the larger the firm at birth, the more frequent the episodes of job creation over their lifetime, and the higher the number of jobs created over their lifetime. Longer survival was associated with more job creation, although there was no obvious pattern or consistency in terms of the timeline of when firms create further jobs. So constant repeated growth in terms of job creation was a rare occurrence, and that is also consistent with evidence elsewhere. And a final point on this report, and it's not specifically drawn from this report, is that we have found there to be somewhat of a trade-off between productivity growth and employment growth. And this is essentially because productivity improvements are about doing more with less or more with the same. So therefore, productivity growth is often at the expense of employment. And we have found in other research that of those businesses with productivity growth, less than 10% have both productivity growth and employment growth in the same year. So we should be mindful of these competing outcomes when designing policies to support productivity growth. So I'll make the following points then in regards to SME support. So as the Northern Ireland business birth rate continues to remain lowest of the UK regions and with a lower death rate, it remains important that policy continues to provide support for business births to prevent a stagnating economy and to generate job creation. While support for startup in general is welcome, low barriers to entry may result in business births continuing to be concentrated in lower productivity sectors. It is important that there is also more specific focus on those with a capacity for innovation and growth, and that's so-called productive entrepreneurship. Support will also be required for business starts in new and evolving sectors where the risks are higher and relatively unknown. So access to risk capital and understanding of those differing business models and a sufficient pipeline of skilled labour will all be required to support the creation and survival of such innovative, productive businesses. And Chair, my final comments relate to the developments that have taken place over the last number of years in regards to support for business startups. So just over a year ago, Northern Ireland launched a new enterprise support service known as Go Succeed. So this is a welcome addition to the business support landscape, and it is encouraging to see that it is a service rather than a programme. It also supports firms not just at the startup phase, but also those wishing to grow and those with greater ambitions to scale. There has also been developments in terms of support for more innovative startups, known as innovation-driven enterprises. So this has been taken forward in part through the participation of relevant local policy and SME support stakeholders in the Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Programme, or REAP as it's known, which is an MIT programme. And among the developments arising from this has been the launch of a new accelerator programme called Founder Labs, which is focused on support for those more technology-based, innovation-driven enterprises. So a final remark that I will make is that Northern Ireland will only increase the number of business births if we have sufficient numbers of people willing to start up a business. Cultural and social norms can influence the attractiveness and acceptance of such behaviour, but one of the areas in which Northern Ireland has been identified as lacking is in entrepreneurial education. So we should consider that as an important element in the underlying conditions for business startup, and more widely in terms of the skill set required within innovative and productive businesses. Thank you.
Dr. Bonner, thank you, and Gareth, thank you for that. If you don't mind if I start, just in terms of government intervention then, so the last point actually feeds into something that previous guests were making remarks of in relation to young enterprise and their concern at the lack of continuation support for that. But I'm just keen to get your view in terms of government intervention. Obviously, the Assembly will soon be deciding upon its budget for the next financial year. Is there any government intervention you see that we should be championing to try and overcome some of the difficulties that are currently in place?
I think there's actually been quite a few developments just in the last year in that space. As I mentioned, Go Succeed has it's literally just a year old at this stage. I think the benefit of that, as I said, it's a service rather than just a one-off programme. And the fact that firms and business owners can go back over time at different stages and avail of different support, and there's mentorship associated with that and signposting to relevant support. So I know there's issues with the funding for that is through SPF funding, and there's perhaps a bit of a cliff edge within the next few years. So I would, I know we're in very early days of that, but it would be good to see that if that support could be continued. At the innovation-driven end, you know, that's again a recent development with the Founder Labs, and there's other developments in that space. I think that's, again, we need more support for those more innovative business startups if we really want to see the productivity improvements. So there's been, as I said, quite a few developments. I guess we need to give them time to work through to see how successful they've been. But yes, if there could be guaranteed support so that we can see the long-term or medium-term impact of those, I think that would be really beneficial, rather than starting something and then having to do away with it and try to start up something new again.
Yeah, I suppose it speaks to that piece of the thing that business want most is certainty.
Just in terms of gap in provision, I mean, as Karen said, there's a lot of what we're doing that's very good, and do more of it basically. But what are we not doing enough of, in our view, is probably around Karen's last point, which was entrepreneurial education. And we have one of the main reasons that business startup and entrepreneurial activity is lower in Northern Ireland is a cultural issue, and one of the reasons for that is a lack of entrepreneurial education. And I'm talking about a lack of that in schools. So getting young people at 12, 13, 14, 15 and showing them that entrepreneurial activity is a viable career path. That's not happening at the moment. And I think particularly for those young people, let me start at it. Whenever you talk to entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, they tend not to have done that well at school.
Yes.
And so you therefore have two groups of people in school, those that don't do well in school and then go on and be successful, and those that don't do well in school and engage in antisocial behaviour and all the other challenges that are associated with that. So by trying to engage those young people at 13, 14, 15 who are at risk of disengagement and getting them involved in and showing them an entrepreneurial education pathway, whether that's in school, but also perhaps, and I would argue at 14, young people should be given access to further education and some pathways at vocational and training at that age, rather than waiting till 16, at which time many of them have already become disengaged, and getting them back at that point is much harder. So we have, I guess what I'm saying is, where's the gap? Is around entrepreneurial education at school, but then also in FE and HE. I'm not saying it's not happening in FE and HE, but there's certainly a lot more that could be done in terms of building people's resilience and creativity, and then also from a practical point of view, how do you set up a business? What are the legal lessons, financial lessons? Then mentorship programs for young people. I know I'm no longer involved in CERC, but I was the chair in South Eastern Regional College for a period. We had an entrepreneur in residence there who worked with young people who were setting up firms as part of their course. So I think that there are good examples of that, but that's an area that I think that there's significant scope for expansion.
Perfect. Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting. I suppose probably that the concept is not widely known in terms of, you know, the essential replacing old with new in terms of productivity, and it's part of the puzzle as opposed to the entire jigsaw. Agree entirely to your last point, particularly around entrepreneurial education. Like, this has come up time and time again at the committee about that intervention with regards trying to tilt our young people towards jobs of the future and careers, and I think that point is well made. We're not intervening early enough, and there's no continuity really with that entrepreneurial education. There's some good examples, good practice, but there's some equally that's not. I suppose I want to really focus in on the productivity aspect. So I think I picked you up right, Karen, when you said about the lowest business birth rates in the UK between 2010 and 21. Is that right?
Well, that's the period that we looked at for that research.
Is there any particular spikes in that, or is it just a general rule or principle, or is there any anomalies in that period?
The business birth rate has increased over the period, but it has increased in the context of an increasing UK business birth rate. So we've sort of consistently lagged behind, even though we have increased.
Okay, and say, looking at our productivity levels, we know that they're low. So what is the main reason? So is it just, I think the report focuses very heavily on the type of jobs, the type of businesses. That's one aspect of it, but what, in your opinion, would be other reasons for low productivity levels in Northern Ireland disproportionate to that in the rest of the UK?
I think when businesses start up, they start up very small, so fewer than 5 employees. Often when they start, they're serving a local market. And we know in Northern Ireland, our domestic Northern Ireland market is smaller than elsewhere. So if you're starting small and you have a limited market and you're not selling in export markets or even into the GB market, there's a limit in terms of how how productive you could be with few employees and a small market to serve. So that also would be part of it.
So it's probably very difficult for anybody to draw just naturally on the conclusion that Northern Ireland has lower productivity rates across the UK. It's not really comparing apples with oranges whenever we look at different parts of the UK, accessibility, market access, those type of reasons. So it wouldn't just be a clear-cut picture to the reasons defining Northern Ireland's low productivity rates.
Yes, it wouldn't be as clear-cut, and we did look at quite broad sectors, and we weren't delving into the individual firm level records to look at individual firms. This was very much at averages that we were looking at. The sectoral picture is part of it as well, because we have higher business birth rates in low productivity sectors where there's, as I said, lower barriers to entry, so it's easier to set up. It's sometimes in those lower productivity sectors, and we also have relatively small, I suppose, sectors that are high productivity sectors. So our financial and insurance sector is relatively small. So even when you get people who set up in an industry in which they're working, if that industry itself is small, you get fewer startups in that industry.
So replacing old with new business, the correlation with productivities, the evidence in which you suggest is clear. Are all sectors able to become have more productivity with the new technologies involved? Is there an ability? Because I look at some of the stats, which is alarming for me, obviously, is the Armagh, Brembridge and Craigavon area, which you say has the lowest labour productivity rates and also has the most predicted job losses, as things are. Is there an ability to say that those, and I think that's largely because that's probably the agri-food aspect of jobs within the ABC, is there any correlation to say that those particular sectors cannot become more productive, and therefore government intervention is therefore necessary to ensure that they're able to transition rather than replacement?
I think it's around then the investment that you're making into the business, and you can enter a very traditional sector, even such as manufacturing, but you can invest in new technologies in that sector and, you know, produce more efficiently. So you can be very productive in traditional sectors. It's not to say if you start up in agriculture that you're going to be unproductive, but it's about making those investments in new technologies, new processes, new methods of working. So it's again, I appreciate we were looking at very broad sectors. But I do think, you know, there is definitely scope that even in, I know in Northern Ireland we have higher shares of firms and employees in agriculture and manufacturing, but that's not to say that they can't be more productive.
And I like, come on, so I suppose my point essentially is, because of some of the very traditional sectors that we have here, you talk about agri-food, large sector employment in terms of their base. The point of government not intervening in terms of policies, whether it's financial, essentially they should, but it's to help create more productivity with new technologies as opposed to no support at all. And that's the bit that I'm trying to put together, is how do we ensure that those industries essentially they sustain a local population, that they're still there in the future.
Yeah, I think that, so there's two elements to the sectoral productivity story. One has been talked about in terms of we have larger, lower productivity sectors and smaller, higher productivity sectors. But even when you compare in-sector productivity with Northern Ireland and the UK sectoral, so UK finance productivity will be higher than Northern Ireland finance productivity. So there is, and you see that across all the sectors, so there is scope within all sectors to increase their productivity. And I think what we're seeing is new starts in those sectors are more likely to reflect the local market, local lower levels of productivity, than new starts in the English market, for example. So I think, and what you're saying is correct in terms of, well, how do you increase productivity? Investment and business investment's a big part of that picture.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, sir. Sinead?
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. You've talked about productivity growth comes kind of at the expense of employment growth. Does that indicate that we should focus specifically on productivity rather than the employment growth? And including, does that mean that you're suggesting that we set targets for productivity, and should we set targets for productivity for each region? Because the disparity within Northern Ireland, whilst Northern Ireland has the lowest productivity within the regions, within Northern Ireland the disparity is absolutely vast. It's incredible, you know, that you would go from Belfast, the highest productivity in Northern Ireland, to Derry, which is the actual lowest of all of the council regions. And there's a 31% difference between Belfast and Derry in relation to productivity. So that require specific interventions in that in order to raise it, because we're the lowest area of productivity, which, as I say, is Derry. It's holding back. It is, well, according to the report here. I'm talking about the sub-regional report from the Minister. So number 1 is Belfast. It's the highest, and number 11
is the report.
Well, there you go. So what do you do in order to raise the lowest up, because if we don't raise the lowest up, we're not going anywhere with the Northern Ireland figures. This is the area that you need to concentrate energy, resources, investment in order to raise the productivity of the entire region. So what is the suggestion from academics in order to tackle the disparities within Northern Ireland?
So I'll take your first point as well about the trade-off between the employment growth and the productivity growth. So I do think in policy terms it's very difficult to achieve both. Because on one hand, if you're asking firms to grow their employment but also be more productive, which is often about shedding employees to do more with less. So I would say yes, if one of the minister's priorities is around productivity improvements, that interventions should be geared towards that. If job creation also happens, and we know the new starts to create jobs, well, the intervention should be focused more on the productivity side of it. In terms of how we sort of rebalance, and obviously there is that regional rebalance piece again, one of the priorities. It's part of it, it will be to do with startups, but I guess the other part of it is to do with foreign direct investment and trying to attract those high productivity international firms who will have the know-how, they will have different ways of working, possibly hire skilled managers and so on. So it's about just also attracting FDI probably outside of Belfast to those regions. And we know that FDI can also encourage spin out into startups. So it's sort of it helps both sides of it. You know, you're attracting multinational firms, but you're also getting startups as a result of that, or to start up to support the supply chain of those new FDI companies.
Just a point on the trade-off. So historically, we've had a focus on employment growth, and I think that's been the right thing to do because we've had higher unemployment. We currently have very low levels of unemployment at the moment, albeit economic inactivity is still high, and we do need to work on that. But shifting the focus, let's put it this way, in the next 10 to 15 years, the focus should not necessarily be as much on employment growth because the people aren't there. The focus really should be on productivity growth. So it was right that the focus was on employment growth when unemployment was much higher, but as we reach fuller employment, then it is correct that we do start to focus more on productivity growth.
Can I just ask about measurements for productivity growth? Because when you're looking into it, there are various academics and various reports that measure productivity in different ways. What do you suggest how productivity is actually measured?
Well, so productivity is well, yeah, there's a number of different measures. What I would say is as long as you use the same measure over time, and for comparisons, that's the right way to proceed. But you can have GVA per worker, or you can have probably the more accurate measure is GVA per hour worked, because if you have someone working full-time and you have someone working part-time, they're clearly going to produce lower GVA than two people working full-time, for example. So the GVA per hour worked, for me, is the best measure to use in terms of understanding the level of growth that you're going to see, or to get an accurate measure of the growth you're going to see. Now, what you also need to do is you then need to look at the shape of the labour market. So clearly, if you've got a faster growth, let's say, in part-time employment, is that a good thing? Would you rather see increased growth in full-time employment, and that would then generate higher GVA? So the types of jobs that are being created and the total hours worked, as well as GVA per hour, are the two factors that you should be paying most attention to.
I will say as well, just on that, sometimes we don't have access to GVA data at the firm level. So when we're doing some of this analysis, quite often we will only have turnover. So we're using turnover per employee as a proxy. So you will get different measurements, but quite often it's just what the data that's available and the closest approximation that you can make. So for example, in the report we did have to use turnover per employee. It's not as good as GVA per employee, but without access to
Data's not there.
the GVA data at that level, we couldn't do anything.
Yeah. So we've been just talking about data earlier on. Do you mind if I go on and ask another question about that? In relation to the Lions report, whenever it was doing its recommendations on Invest NI, one of the main criticisms was that, you know, there was very little improvement. In fact, there was no improvement in productivity. Even as a result of some of the FDAs, and that was really concerning. We didn't see those measurements going up in any shape, form or fashion. And over recent years, we have seen a reduction in our research and development monies that are going in, even within Invest NI, the money's going into actually R&D. Do you believe that that has a real impact on the ability for companies to get engaged in you know, more innovative work, and ultimately it's having an impact on our productivity?
Yes, so R&D would be linked to productivity, R&D and innovation. I would say because most of our firms in Northern Ireland are micro firms, so fewer than 10 employees, and actually with the day-to-day, whatever they're producing to sell or whatever service they're providing, actually having the time to undertake R&D or innovative behaviour on top of that. So part of it is a time issue and a resource issue in having the employees with the skills to undertake R&D, to look at new technologies, to see how that would be embedded in their business, or how they can devise new products with new technology, for example. So there's part of a resource sort of issue. It is encouraging in the R&D data in Northern Ireland that I think it's around half of the business expenditure on R&D is within SMEs, and you know, half and half sort of between large and small firms. So it is good that we do have our SMEs being engaged in R&D activity, but I think a lot of it just goes back to the timing and the resource and not having the capacity to undertake R&D on top of the day-to-day.
Yeah.
And I think it stresses the importance of targeting the right type of FDI companies to locate in Northern Ireland. If you go for the knowledge-intensive, innovative FDI companies, they're the organisations that are more likely to invest more in R&D and take advantage of those supports that are available.
Yeah, and unfortunately Brexit took away a lot of our capacity in relation to EU funding for R&D. So there has been a struggle, particularly within our academic institutions and within the Invest NI monies, to actually support businesses in research and development. So look, do you have any ideas of what targets we should be setting for productivity?
Well, so we haven't looked specifically at productivity targeting. I think in general terms, given that the UK isn't a stellar performer when you compare it to its G7 peers, and whenever you look at where Northern Ireland sits within the UK, we tend to be in the bottom quartile. So there is significant scope for improvement. I would be... And the other thing is that obviously it's a dynamic picture. So not just our productivity will change over time, but the productivity of our neighbours will change over time. So I would be wanting to set targets that would take us to at least, you know, UK average within a 5 to 10 year period. Rather than setting a specific number, it would be to achieve something of that order. So something like UK average. That allows for the dynamic change in productivity of other parts of UK, Ireland, Europe and relevant peers.
I suppose in your papers you've indicated that Northern Ireland reaches only 58% of the EU 15 level of productivity. So kind of like a compelling argument that that's where we need to concentrate on
Yeah.
as well.
And I think if you set the productivity target, if it's a productivity target, that's the exam question, you will then get organisations like Invest NI focusing on FDI projects that are going to raise productivity. Previously, I said we've tended to focus on employment for all the right reasons.
Centres.
But that's something that needs to be considered.
Okay, I'm going to bring in
Okay,
Kate.
thank you.
It's so interesting, and I keep forgetting what question I was going to ask because I've been listening to each one. I'm quite new to the economy committee, so this has been really educational for me, and I'm really glad that you started with saying that about the importance of education in terms of business dynamism, and David always talks about that entrepreneurial spirit as well, so I think that's really important. And I was going to ask that about that's really interesting, the economic productivity trade-off and the need to focus on productivity now. I guess the two kind of remaining things that I wanted to ask about was Invest and I are going in a different direction now, and there's that focus on local economic partnerships. Do you have any academic advice on how the department should implement this model, and what are your thoughts on this change of direction for the department and Invest?
So I think one of the criticisms that came out of the review, and I do think there was merit in it, is that it was a bit of a closed shop. And if you were in and you were an Invest NI client, you had access to all the supports and all the advice. And if you weren't in, you didn't. There was a lot of government supports that were not available. And I think moving away, the review's been very clear about the need to move away from that model and that approach. And I do think Invest NI are moving in that direction. And I think what that does then for companies who are outside the loop, it opens up a lot more potential support for them. And Karen referenced the Go Succeed programme. One of the issues that we've seen is that it's quite a complex landscape. Yeah. So you've got Invest NI doing stuff, you've FE doing stuff, HE's doing, the local government, each council, they provide a number of economic development projects and programmes. And so it's a complex picture, and if you're just trying to run your business, having visibility of all of that and knowing where to go is a problem. Yeah. I think that's where, fingers crossed, every indication's positive, but that's where Go Succeed should be. That's the initial place you go, you talk to a mentor, an advisor, and they point you in the right direction. So that could be, if you're a small startup, go speak to your council. If you've got much higher growth potential, you then speak to Invest NI, and the full range of programmes are open for everyone. So I think that general direction of travel is the right way to proceed.
Yeah. That's really interesting, because that was one of the concerns that was brought up when the Minister made a statement, was how you avoid that duplication. And I thought it was really interesting how you said the benefit of Go Succeed is that it's a service, it's not a programme. We tend to roll out these programmes all the time, and then when they cease to exist, they just stop. So having that service is really interesting. One of your colleagues who I met with had taught me about the importance of replacement demand, and we so often talk about the kind of these new high growth sectors, and so I'm just curious about what you have to say in relation to that in traditional sectors like hospitality and retail, who we heard from earlier on, in delivering job creation, how important that replacement demand is to our economy.
So this is linked to the Skills Barometer work, and the latest iteration of our Skills Barometer will be published early next year. So yes, replacement demand represents, I think, about 2/3 of the total additional jobs that are going to be created over the next 10-year period. So you've replacement demand and you've expansion demand. So expansion demand is what everyone thinks of, when sectors are growing or different parts of the economy are growing, they create new jobs. But we have to remember, in large sectors, let's say a very mature sector like retail, although there's unlikely to be significant growth in terms of the numbers of people employed in retail over the next 5 to 10 year period, there's obviously over that time period significant numbers of people who are going to leave for various reasons, retire, for example, over a 10-year period. Typically, you'll lose a quarter of your workforce through retirement. And so because areas like retail are so large, in 120,000 employees roughly, you will have a significant number of new jobs that need replaced. The other thing as well, I think, for the likes of retail and hospitality, they tend, and I'm got my skills hat on here, they tend to be seen as lower skills or lower qualifications, maybe is a better word to use, lower qualification sectors compared to, let's say, professional services. But whenever you look, because they're vast, because they're so big and such large employers, they create jobs at all skill levels. And so there is still a reasonable number of higher skill level and qualification level jobs within the likes of the retail and hospitality sectors.
Yeah, okay. So interesting. Check, can they come back? Thank you. Thank you. No. I said, can they come back?
Oh yeah, of course, definitely.
Processing all of this.
You were looking to come back.
David.
So, yeah, I just want to pick up on a couple of little things that you were talking about R&D. I completely agree in education. It doesn't, and I could chat back and forward, and I just think we're producing civil servants, not anything for our economy in the main, and there needs to be a change there. But you were talking about R&D with Sinead, and the back and forward there. But what actions could we do to encourage further R&D? What again, looking at our economy in the wide, what can we do to encourage more here?
Well, there was actually last week, I think there was the announcement of the new Business Innovation Grant, and what was really encouraging about that, and it goes back to the previous point about InvestNI being a closed shop. So this was announced and it's open. You don't have to be an InvestNI client to access this. So it is open to businesses right across Northern Ireland. We recently did a piece of work looking at specifically R&D and innovation business supports, and that was one of the areas that we found maybe a bit of a gap in Northern Ireland, was at that support for new products and bringing them onto market, so that commercialisation end. So I do think that new announcement last week really sort of speaks to that, so that was a welcome addition. I think in terms of encouraging companies to do it, it probably as well goes back to the skills piece and having the people there with the skills to adapt and adopt new technologies and know how to utilise them in their business and how to utilise them to create new products and services. So a lot of this just goes back to the education piece in different ways. And even when Gareth mentioned earlier about the entrepreneurial education, part of that is around giving people skills and creativity and spotting opportunities. And that in itself helps that innovative mindset, and how do you do things differently? How do you do things in new ways? How do you come up with brand new products, spot gaps? So again, it goes back to that entrepreneurial education piece.
The human capital section of the report talks about peer management within the UK actually as a whole, and then we're lagging behind. Can you talk us through that a little bit more of how we can move that and change that?
Yes, well, we did another report recently on management and leadership training in Northern Ireland SMEs, and that report we were trying to understand of those that do management and leadership training, why do they do it, what do they get out of it, but we also wanted to speak to those who don't do training. And why not? Are there barriers in that? Now, when we looked at the data before we spoke to anyone, it did appear that there were a majority not doing any training, but when we went out and actually spoke to them, it turns out that, again, due to resources and time and money issues, they're maybe not going on external training courses, but they're finding other ways to upskill. A really big part of it was that they're using mentors, and this may just be someone that they previously worked with, or someone they know from a different sector, or an older person that they know just through network connections. So they're maybe not being able to afford to go on training schemes, but they are finding different ways to upskill that suits their business size and that suits them and allows them to do it while still running the business. So we did have a number of recommendations from that report. One of them was, again, around an awareness piece. What we did find was when we asked them, what training providers are you aware of that do training in the management and leadership space? most of them said they're not really aware of what's out there. Yes, they might know a few if they use them, but even those that were using training providers didn't know what else. They didn't know what government was providing. They unfortunately didn't know what the universities were doing in this space. And I get they just don't have time to be sitting looking up what's
Just doing,
out there.
doing their business and doing
So one of the recommendations, again, was something similar, to have a portal where the information is provided and they can go then, and it's quite obvious. They don't have to go Googling, you know. And there was other, because the mentor piece came out as really strong, we did think maybe a register of mentors, like a formal register somewhere, would be quite useful, because at the moment it's very informal. They're getting mentors through the networks, but maybe if there was a formal register where people could say how they could help your business, that would be useful. Another point that sort of came out was, and it probably goes back to the productivity piece, business owners don't speak in the same language that economists speak in. So to them, productivity can mean something very different. There was a bit around when you tell them, you know, your productivity is low, they're interpreting that as they're not working hard enough, and they obviously are. So there's something maybe around the language or on training provision of speaking to their language, to maybe encourage them to take part.
Yeah, I was just on the one important aspect of the formal education or training piece, again, that we tend not to perform terribly well in, is the networking that goes on there. So when you actually ask people, why are you doing an MBA? Well, part of it is to raise your technical skills and knowledge, but another part is to develop a new network of similar-minded people. And if you have less people in those networks, or if you have less networks because less people are trading, then there's a lot less benefits that come out of that. One of the other important aspects of that formal training is the mentoring piece, and what mentors can do is provide aspiration. So one reason that businesses aren't perhaps investing as much in R&D or other activities, it's just a lack of aspiration, and they don't necessarily have a role model or someone just external just pushing them along and getting them to go further down the track. So I think that formal training and education for people in work as well as people out of work can also delivers a lot of other unseen benefits that you wouldn't necessarily identify at the outset.
Okay, just one last final, is that all right? Yeah, the language barrier between economist and business, there's a third element, and that's in here, which is completely another language altogether. But the Irish Times today has an article today from I'm joking, from the Ulster University, from yourselves, and it talks about if our GDP or our growth is 1.9% or something. It's quite a bit higher than the UK average, but it's still not great. And one of the things it says, making the right economic focused investments. If this assembly does that moving forward, we'll see growth in the. What can you quickly talk us through what that looks like?
Yeah, so that was my line.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, no, mine, not the team. Yeah, so I have quite a strong view on it. So one of the things about economic development and requires economic development is policy alignment across the piece. So if delivering a globally competitive economy, if that's our number one priority, then we need to see everything through that lens. So whenever we then make capital infrastructure investment decisions, is that going to grow the economy? That should be the first question. So there's an extra 300 million of capital spend coming as a result of the UK budget. How are we going to spend that? Okay, are we going to invest in an economic infrastructure? So I've said before in other forums, if it was down to me, I would give all of it to NI Water, and I would say, you guys need to get on and fix your wastewater infrastructure. Okay, how are we going to spend it? I don't know. We might build schools with it. There might be other that all merit investment. I'm not saying we shouldn't invest in these things, but what will deliver the biggest economic impact? And so if we look at the schools estate, for example, obviously the Audit Office, you'll be familiar with the recent Audit Office report in terms of the need to modernise. In 2020, there were 60,000 surplus places in our schools. This was in response to an AQ. There were 60,000 surplus places in our schools in 2020. I referenced it in my opening comments. There's a demographic piece of work, or a piece of work we did in demographics. Between now and 2040, there's going to be a reduction of 53,000, another 53,000 of school-aged children, 5 to 18-year-olds. So how should we be investing capital funding in that demographic environment with an economic lens? And I would put everything through. Obviously, I'm an economist. I want to see the economy grow. This is the economy committee, so your priority, at least for the purpose of this meeting, is the economy. That is, for me, where that needs to be invested, is what's going to grow the economy.
Brilliant. Yeah, I've seconded how I bring them back again whenever. Every week.
You're willing.
Cheers. Thank you.
Patrick?
Thanks, Chair. Look, just to check, 3 questions that I had really. One was around the GVA that you've already talked about. So obviously one of the issues that we have is that there's not a standardized measure across the north. So I'm wondering, in terms of actually accessing this data, and I appreciate you've said you haven't got all the data, but in terms of actually accessing it and making sure that we can make informed decisions, do you think that there needs to be a standardized measure? For example, the department and invest using different measurements. Do you think that that is a barrier to actually fully understanding and getting a grip of the data around productivity?
I'll just, in terms of accessing the data, there is data collected through the annual business inquiry, so it does pick up it does pick up GVA data. The problem, or not problem, but the sort of limitation around that is that it's a sample survey, so it's not picking up the GVA for every firm. You know, that you can make estimates at the Northern Ireland level based on the data that is collected, but if we want to look at the individual productivity levels of individual firms and track them over time, you can't do that because it's not surveying every firm. So you can get access to GVA data, but in terms of what you might be able to do with it, there are just some limitations around it, simply because it just not every firm is surveyed. They obviously weighted to be representative, but in terms of what we did on, for example, the job creation, we did have access to individual records for each firm over time, but you don't have access to GVA for every firm in Northern Ireland over time. So there's some limitations.
Yeah, I think just the priority has to be consistency of approach. So if you have different parts of one government department or a government department and its agencies using slightly different measures, I mean, certainly, yeah, the recommendation would be to get on the same page and use the same measure. I think, to be fair to the individuals who maybe were pulling that together, because there isn't necessarily a mandated measure within the department, then they may pick different measures. As I said previously, I don't have a specific issue with any one measure, but I would just rather there was a consistency in terms of what was used across the department.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose the consistency is the key in terms of actually being able to understand it and universally understand it as well. So just I wanted to touch actually on the second point, was around R&D, and you mentioned the split between SMEs and FDI, and I think it's 40% of R&D investment goes into 10 companies. So within that, I'm just keen to kind of get a better understanding of the data that you've collected there. You've mentioned about a fairly even split between SMEs and FDI, but obviously SMEs are over 90% of our economy. So is that a split in terms of percentage, or is that a split in terms of number? Because I'm just off the top of my head, if I was to pick a figure, say you had 20 FDIs that are receiving this funding and 20 SMEs, that means a lot less to the broader SME sectors and the businesses more broadly than it does the FDI. So just to get a better understanding of that point.
Yeah, so that's data from the Business Expenditure and R&D survey. So that's an ISRA survey. I was the half and half. I think was just from the top of my head. I don't know the exact splits, but I know it was the last time I looked at it, it was roughly sort of even. You are correct that it is very concentrated in a relatively small number of firms, and I think also very concentrated in certain council areas. So I think Armagh, Banbridge, Craigavon and maybe Mid-Ulster are the two where there's heavy concentrations of R&D, but that's simply because they're council areas with very heavy concentrations of that manufacturing and heavy engineering companies that are undertaking the R&D. So yes, it is an issue when it's very concentrated. You would rather it was more broadly spread out. So I think when I talked about the split, I think that was probably in percentage terms as opposed to number of firms. I do know it is very concentrated.
Just if I could sorry, I was going to say if I could just make one point on the comment about SMEs being over 90% of the economy. If you look at the number of businesses, so SMEs make up something like 98% of the total businesses. But if you have a tradesman, a plumber in his van, that's one business. Tesco is one business. So we have to, even though that SMEs in terms of numbers of businesses make up the huge proportion of the businesses, from an employment perspective, it's much more 50-50.
Yeah, no, totally understand that, and apologies, my terminology in terms of the economy was wrong in that, but I think that the point still stands that overall we need to be really focusing on trying to get more SMEs involved, particularly in one of the key barriers to productivity is around family firms and firms that have kind of stayed in the family and stuff like that. So it's how we get into those businesses and create the development opportunities for them. Just brings me on to my last point, which is around regional balance. And obviously there are specific industries that are flourishing. You've mentioned, for example, and I think it's kind of the one that we hear time and time again about industry in Mid-Ulster, which is great. But how do we actually try and look at productivity on a more regional basis? Because the productivity figures that we're looking at are obviously going to be across the north. How do we get those broken down to make sure that we're targeting this? Because while we might be able to see an overall increase in productivity, it's actually not until we get to the fine detail that we can work out how do we do that business by business, community by community, region by region. And I think that until we can actually answer those questions, we're not going to be able to tackle the overarching issue.
Yes, I think that, and I suppose it goes back to, well, how do you create greater regional balance? And that's obviously one of the key priorities for the minister. I suppose what I would say is that we're not there yet, but a couple of members of my team are doing a piece of work on regional balance, and I haven't had sight of it yet, so I can't comment too much in terms of the specifics, but we'll be happy to come back to the committee and talk about regional balance at length if that.
I don't think
it doesn't want that. Region you want to talk about? It's actually looking at the key things, because when we look at all the ministerial objectives, we look at them sometimes. We appreciate we do it presentation by presentation, but sometimes we look at them in isolation.
Yeah.
So if we're actually able to look at the two of the four key themes and actually tie those on together, I think we really get a lot more answers. But really appreciate, I have about a million other questions, but I'm conscious of time. So thanks very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Finally, Diana.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll have to be popping off after this question, but thank you to Karen and Gareth. It's been a really interesting conversation. And when you mentioned, Karen, the portal, it just brought back to my memory the NI Business Info portal during COVID and how vital that was in relaying, credible information to business owners. And I do think the portal is something that a lot of smaller business owners, smaller firms could get great benefit out of in terms of availability of mentoring and training. And I do have a lot of sympathy for family-owned businesses because the pressures on the single, the business owner to be able to address all the demands and also incorporate time for research and development and to improve skills is so difficult to find. But I wanted to ask just a question because most of the other pieces have been covered. Just two things, innovation being key to productivity, to bring forward new innovative practices. And you mentioned, or in the report, it's talking about the lack of new to world innovation. Where do we go? Where does Northern Ireland go? Where do businesses go to incubate those new to world innovation? Where are the examples of best practice that can be adapted for here? To allow us become leaders in innovation in certain fields. And the second question, really, it might be a bit controversial, but there's a lobby, for the work-life balance is the 4-day week. And how do we reach productivity targets in a 4-day week, given that we're at almost full capacity for employment? So just would be interested to have your comments on both those points. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So just on the innovation point, so Singapore is an area or a country that has really accelerated in terms of its innovation-driven startups, and they really built that around digital technology. So what they did was, it was almost like a whole of government approach. So investing in the infrastructure, investing in the skills, investing in the support. They put in a lot of making sure that there's that risk finance available, because especially the new to the world are going to be, it's an unknown. And for example, for bank lenders, it's probably too risky when there's an unknown outcome or unknown business models. So there's a need to ensure that that early stage finance is there, that it allows for that more risky innovation, that new to the world innovation. It'll again go back to investment in skills, so that your population has those skills to work with digital technology and know how to utilize that. So I think there's not one easy answer to this. I think there are multiple policy interventions that all have to be, similar to what Gareth said earlier, it all has to be sort of tailored to the one overarching aim, and you have to work towards that from different aspects to be able to achieve those outcomes.
And I suppose my contribution to that as well, where are you going to get new to world as well? Where's there new knowledge being developed? And that's within higher education institutions. So it's about working with, and both UU and Ulster, or UU and Queen's do this in terms of incubating new firms and commercialising them. I suppose it goes back to one of the points that I made at the very outset, which is that's great, but we just need to do more of it. So we need to be incubating more new to world businesses, new to world innovations within our higher education institutions, and then commercialising those. That's on that point. On the work-life balance, so I haven't been asked this question before. So work-life balance is so that's a euphemism for working less. Not saying that's the case, but that's often how it's perceived. How do I improve my work-life balance? If as a manager, if someone comes to you and asks you that question, they're not wanting to work harder. So that's kind of how it's seen. What needs to happen is, well, how do you allow someone to improve their work-life balance that makes them more productive? Yeah. And the answer to that is good management. And I think that goes back to one of the sort of areas of poorer performance here is lower levels of management and leadership training. And I think that that's a piece of work that we as an economy need to do, is improving our management practices to allow people to improve their work-life balance on the one hand, but also maintaining their productivity on the other.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you both very much for that. I think at least one, if not all, the committee will be very keen to have you back again very soon. So thank you very much for that. It's very, very interesting.
Thank you. History back.
Yeah, thank you so much.
back to me to summarise.
During an APG at 2, I need to.
So, members, just in terms of the previous briefing that we had, the committee can tend to write to the Department for the Economy and ask them about the use of SAMBIT, the Small and Micro Business Impact Level. Also to write to the Department of Finance just about prompt payment, capital decisions, because it's an issue with capital surge, usually at the end of the financial year. VAT research on what their plans are for the pubs and hotels rates relief. Okay, we tend to do that. And then in terms of UEPC, you can tend to invite them back to tell us about regional balance or...
Yeah, no, I think all members found it really interesting in general. I think one of the points I would have loved to raise, but maybe it wasn't in their specific remit. Obviously, David's point actually provoked it with me when he talked about our school system about producing civil servants, and I know it was crass, but it's in generally he has a point. So particularly when you look at Northern Ireland, 26.8% public sector in comparison with the rest of the UK, which is 17.3 when you look at an average. So I was just trying to wonder about, and that probably goes beyond our committee, more towards maybe finance, but how more difficult is it to measure productivity levels within the public sector? Do the technologies available not actually better suit productivity in the public sector, so that we always talk about finance around this table, and finance is key to it. So just that was an observation. I don't know if other members I don't know if we can physically take that part up.
We could write to UEPC about that, about measuring productivity in the public sector. I would have thought it would be easier, but anyway.
Well, I thought it would be more difficult because productivity in the private sector is more about output. There's more obstacles to output in the public sector, and even when we talk about work-life balances and that's more difficult to ascertain how it leads to better productivity levels than it would be in some of the sectors in the private sector where there's very, very clear systems put in place to manage productivity.
Patrick?
Yep. Really good point.
Patrick?
Yeah, Chair, I want to come in on the back of actions for that last presentation. Can I come in now?
Of course you can.
Yeah, so two things just on the back of that. We had previously written to the Education Committee asking for another joint session. I'm just wondering, firstly, did we hear back on that, and is there a set date for that?
I've informally heard back from the Education Clerk. They're looking at May. They're very keen on having, this is what they've said, because they think there will be various other things we'll have reported about then. So they're looking for May, and please don't go.
We're going to need to.
Okay.
Another committee at 2 p.m.
I think,
yeah, so we're about to go. So so that's what they said. So we'll have to agree with them, and they're talking about May, because I think other things are going to be, other reports will be available at that time that they want to talk about. But they're very keen on trying to get both ministers to attend the joint concurrent session.
I'm just conscious that we raised this probably maybe 4 or 5 months ago now, and like May is. I mean, that's nearly a year after we've raised it. And while I do appreciate that, there'll be developments by that stage, this is a critical part of both our conversation and education's conversation around skills around 14 to 19. So I would like, if we could write to them again, if other members are agreeable to this, we could write again and actually ask for an additional session before that. To me, May is nearly a year after we've put the request in. And it's far too long. And Chair, just on the back of that, I want to raise another point, but I want to clarify that one obviously firstly, and then move on to my second.
If you could just come on quickly to your point, because there's members leaving the room here of another committee.
Right.
So what's
my second point is around, months ago we wrote to the further education colleges in the south, and I'm yet to hear if we have any development on when they're going to be invited.
That item's on forward work plan.
It is in the forward work programme, and the next time we visit the McGee College, it'll be to hear from UU. But the time after that, we've lined up Atlantic Technology University and that group. There's a tertiary education group who are going to come along, and that is in the forward work programme.
Okay, and the Education Committee, if members are content in the first instance, we'll speak directly to the chair of the committee just to say the committee are keen to do that rather than get into formal communication with them on that stage. Okay, correspondence. Are members content that we note or action those as advised in the index?
Agreed.
Okay, we're agreed. And then we then move to item number 9, which is the forward work plan. Peter,
There's
anything you want?
nothing to say, just next Thursday week, members are invited to a session with the American Chamber of Commerce, if they can make it, and that's it.
Yep, perfect. Okay. Item 10, any other relevant business members? Kate?
Yes, sorry. Earlier on, I said that we are starting the all-party group on policy and public data. That is true, but I said it was starting tomorrow. I think standards and privileges must watch every second because I got an email saying your APN hasn't gone out. So it will be next Friday, and I think it's really relevant to the work that we're doing if anyone wants to get involved.
Oh, 100%.
Thank you.
Patrick?
Well, Chair, it was just a follow up on the ATU point. I think we'd also written the DKIT. I'm keen that while we do tie in with ATU, I'm conscious that there are other universities as well, and I'm just seeing if we've heard back from them, and if not, can we write them?
No problem.
We have actually heard from them. They did speak to me. I spoke to them over the summer, and they said they would be in contact again. Okay, I can go back to them again.
Great, thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, we're done.
Yeah. Okay, members, with that then I'm going to move into adjourning the committee, and we'll look at our forward work plan next week. So the committee is now adjourned.
Okay.
Thanks, members. Thank you.
The bus.
I don't think
The bus.
Committee Room 30, sound.